Close your eyes and picture her. Snakes for hair, eyes like weapons, a face so terrifying that one glance turns you into stone. That's the Medusa you were taught to fear. But what if I told you that's not how her story began? Long before she was a monster, Medusa was a girl, a priestess, beautiful, devoted, living in the temple of a goddess who was supposed to protect her. Then a god saw her, wanted her, took what he wanted in that sacred place. And when it was over, the universe did what it almost always does. It blamed her. Her beauty became the problem. Her body became the crime scene. Her punishment became the legend. Tonight, we're not just retelling a Greek myth. We're opening a cold case that's been closed for nearly 3,000 years. We're going to ask, why did a victim become the villain? Why did a hero become famous for killing a sleeping exile? And why does Medusa's story still look uncomfortably familiar today? If you've only ever heard the version where Perseus is the hero and Medusa is the monster, you have not heard this story. Let's begin. And before we dive in, welcome to the Unspoken History, the place where legends get cross-examined and monsters finally get to testify. If you enjoy long-form deep dives into the stories behind the stories, the real history beneath the myth, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and maybe grab a drink. Because tonight's journey is not a short one. We're going to follow Medusa's trail the way a historian would, back to the oldest surviving texts, through the temples and theaters of ancient Greece, across Roman poetry, medieval theology, Renaissance painting, all the way to feminist theory and modern survivor stories. To understand how Medusa was rewritten, we first have to understand where her story actually began. Not with Hollywood, not with video games, not even with the Romans. We start almost 3,000 years ago, with a poet standing under a Greek sky, writing the first family tree of the gods. Our investigation begins with a name you may have heard, Perseus. Around 700 BCE, he sat down to compose Theogony, a kind of divine family tree, a who's who of the Greek gods and all the strange beings that lived at the edges of their world. And tucked inside that dense roll call of monsters and deities is the first surviving mention of Medusa, not as a tragic priestess, not as a cursed beauty, just one of three sisters, the Gorgons, living at the edge of the world. Two of them immortal. One of them, Medusa, mortal. And that tiny detail, almost thrown away in a single line, is the first crack in the story that will one day swallow her whole. Every myth begins with fear. And fear always tells you more about the people who feel it than the monsters they imagine. Ancient Greece, the birthplace of Medusa's story, was a world built on fear disguised as order. A world of gods who looked like humans, flawed, jealous, vengeful, but with powers that could rewrite your life in a heartbeat. A world where women's silence was called virtue, and obedience was called safety. To understand Medusa, you can't start with her face. You have to start with the mirror she was made to hold up to everyone else. The Greeks loved their gods the way we love celebrity scandals. They wrote endless stories about them, who loved whom, who betrayed whom, who got punished for wanting too much. Myths were the entertainment industry of the ancient world, the talk shows and movies of their time. But beneath the glitter of Olympus, these stories were also propaganda. They taught you what was safe to be and what was dangerous to become. Men were heroes. Women were prizes or problems. The good woman, Penelope, Persephone, even Athena herself, was loyal, silent, self-controlled. The dangerous woman, Pandora, Medea, Helen, Medusa, was curious, emotional, defiant. Guess which ones the poets wrote to be punished? The Greek mythology didn't invent patriarchy, but it gave it poetry. It wrapped social rules in divine authority. See, the stories whispered. Even the gods agree. A woman who disobeys brings ruin. That's what makes Medusa's curse so potent. It wasn't random cruelty. It was cultural logic. A woman defiled in a temple? The goddess punishes the woman, not the god. Because in that world, purity wasn't a moral idea. It was property. A priestess who lost her purity damaged her goddess's image. She wasn't a victim. She was an embarrassment. And embarrassment was unforgivable. When we read those stories today, it's easy to roll our eyes. Ancient misogyny, old superstitions, dead gods. But strip away the marble statues and the togas, and tell me this doesn't sound familiar. A woman speaks out about being hurt. People rush to protect the institution that failed her instead of her. They question her memory, her motives, her tone. The names change. The arena changes. The story doesn't. In the modern world, we may not have temples to Athena, but we have corporations, universities, churches, and courts. And the reflex is the same. Protect the system. Punish the symbol. That's why the story of Medusa still stings. Because she's not just a myth. She's a blueprint. But before she was a symbol, she was a Gorgon. And before that word meant monster, it meant something very different. The earliest Greek poets, Hesiod, around the 7th century BCE, barely describe her at all. He lists 3 sisters, Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. Only Medusa is mortal. Only Medusa can die. And when she does, from her blood are born 2 children, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the golden warrior. Think about that. From the body of the monster comes flight and freedom. From destruction, creation. That's not horror. That's mythic balance. To the earliest storytellers, Medusa wasn't just evil. She was transformation itself. Over time, though, the edges of that meaning wore away. Poets and painters needed sharper contrasts, good and bad, hero and beast, male and female. So they filed Medusa down into something simpler, a target. And that's where we start to see how myth evolves like media. One century's symbol of sacred mystery becomes the next century's enemy. The same way pop culture can take a woman's story, complicated, human, painful, and turn it into a headline, a meme, a villain edit. Rome did that to Medusa before Hollywood ever could. Ovid's Metamorphoses finished the rewrite. A beautiful girl assaulted by Poseidon in Athena's temple. Athena enraged, not at the god, but at the girl. Her punishment? To make her so hideous that anyone who looked at her turned to stone. It's the ancient world's most poetic metaphor for victim blaming. The idea that a woman's beauty is both her power and her curse. That if men can't control themselves, she's the one who must pay. By the time Rome took over Greece, Medusa's face was everywhere. On shields, armor, jewelry, fountains, doorways. Not to honor her, to weaponize her. They called it the Gorgonion, the protective head of the Gorgon. She became both warning and weapon, a monster whose image was used to keep other monsters away. The irony? They used the face of a violated woman to guard their cities and temples against evil. The world forgot why she was cursed. only that her face could keep danger out. Sound familiar again? We still build walls with the faces of those we've wronged. When we come back, we'll go deeper into those early sources, Hesiod, Homer, and Ovid, and follow how each retelling twisted the knife a little deeper, turning pain into punishment, and punishment into entertainment. Because monsters aren't born, they're made. And Medusa was the masterpiece of that art. It begins, as so many tragedies do, in a place that was supposed to be safe. The temple of Athena at Sunion stood high on a cliff, facing the endless blue of the Aegean. Its marble columns caught the sun like spears of light. Inside, the air smelled of olive oil and salt. Offerings lined the walls, bronze helmets, clay jars, painted shields, reminders of devotion and of war. And in that sacred stillness walked Medusa, a mortal girl serving an immortal goddess. She swept the floors, polished the altars, braided her long dark hair before sunrise. She lived by silence and ritual, by prayers whispered to the statue of Athena, hoping the goddess who guarded heroes and wisdom might one day see her, truly see her. But the gods rarely see mortals for who they are. They see what they want. One day, the sea rose higher than it should have. The waves pounded the cliffs, booming like a heartbeat. The fishermen looked up from their nets and crossed themselves. Poseidon, the god of the sea, was near. In Greek myth, Poseidon is not gentle. He is tide and storm, pride and hunger. He takes what he wants. His trident stirs the deep, and the world obeys. He saw Medusa, they said, as she left the temple to fetch water. The sun hit her hair, long black, braided in devotion to Athena, and the sight pierced even a god. Some poets call it desire. Others call it conquest. Let's call it what it was, a violation. Poseidon pursued her into the temple itself, into the very place that should have protected her. The marble floors that had known only prayers echoed with struggle. The statue of Athena watched, unblinking. And when it was over, the air was still again, except for Medusa's breath, shallow and broken. She wasn't just a victim of a god. She was now a woman unfit for the goddess she served. Because in that world, holiness and purity were property. And the moment a woman's body was marked, no matter how, it stopped belonging to her and started belonging to shame. When Athena appeared, she did not ask what had happened. She did not look at the trembling mortal on her temple floor and see injustice. She saw disrespect, desecration, defilement of her sacred space. It's the oldest reflex of power. Punish the symbol, not the cause. Athena's fury was cold, not hot. She didn't scream. She judged. "You brought dishonor to my temple," the goddess said. "You let him in." Medusa tried to speak, to say that she hadn't let anything, that gods take, and mortals have no power to say no. But the words died in her throat. What argument could she make against divinity? Athena's eyes glowed, not with empathy, but with divine logic. "If men find your face so beautiful that it tempts even gods," she said, "then let it be the last thing any man ever sees." And with that, the curse began. The first sign was her hair. Each strand shimmered, hissed, twisted. Her scalp burned as the braids came alive, unraveling into living serpents that coiled around her shoulders. She screamed, not from pain, but from disbelief, as the air filled with the whisper of scales against skin. Then her skin paled, hardened, shimmered faintly in the dim light, like marble catching breath. Her eyes, those eyes that once turned upward in prayer, became something else entirely. Not windows, but mirrors. Anyone who met them would see themselves reflected back, frozen in the moment of their own fear, a punishment that doubled as a weapon. Athena turned away, her expression unreadable. "Now," she said, "your beauty will never again be a curse." But it was, because now Medusa could no longer touch or be touched. No one could look at her without turning to stone. The girl who had once served the goddess of wisdom was now exiled from every human gaze. She fled the temple, barefoot, heartbroken, hunted, into the wilderness, to the edge of the world, where even maps refused to follow, to a land beyond the sea cliffs, where the horizon itself seemed afraid to look back. There, she made her home among shadows and ruins, her only company the whispering serpents that now crowned her head. Each one carried a life of its own, twitching, flicking, alert to movement. Sometimes, when she wept, they hissed softly, as if trying to comfort her. At night, she dreamed of what she used to be: the temple candles, the smell of olive oil, the sound of prayers echoing off marble. But morning always came, and with it, silence. Even the birds avoided her. They would call her monster. But what word did she have for a god who took, or a goddess who blamed? This is where myth and morality part ways. Athena didn't curse Medusa because she hated her. She cursed her because she needed the world to make sense again. A violated temple, a broken vow, a shame too big for a goddess to bear. Someone had to carry it, and the only one who could was the mortal girl who had no power to refuse. From then on, the name Medusa would no longer mean guardian or protectress, as it once had in the old language. It would mean fear. It would mean danger. It would mean the look that kills. But the cruelest part? No one would remember why. Next time, we'll enter that wilderness with her and see how fear, isolation, and survival turned a cursed girl into the legend that terrified an empire. Because sometimes, when the world calls you monster long enough, you learn to bite back. They say she fled to the edges of the world. But maps lie. The edge of the world is not a line on parchment. It's a condition. It's what happens when no place will have you. Medusa moved through landscapes that did not yet have names. Rocky coasts where the wind screamed louder than any prayer. Caves carved by ancient waves. Black sand that remembered fire. Everywhere she went, the pattern repeated. First, the curiosity. A shepherd spotting a distant figure among the rocks. A group of hunters glimpsing movement in a cave. A warrior, bold or drunk, boasting that no woman could frighten him. Then, the approach. Then, the look. And then, silence. The first time it happened, she didn't understand. A man stumbled upon her while she was drinking from a pool. Medusa turned, startled, her serpents hissing at the sudden presence. Their gazes met. He froze mid-step, every muscle locked. Breath stopped. Color drained from his face as his skin hardened, grayed, cracked. In seconds, he was gone. Not dead in the usual way, not limp or broken. He was stone, eyes still wide, mouth still open in surprise, a statue in the middle of nowhere. Medusa backed away, heart racing, hands shaking. She whispered his name, if she ever knew it. No answer, only the wind. She reached out, just once, fingertips grazing the cold surface of his cheek. It felt like temple marble, like the stone floor where everything had begun. She sank to her knees. It wasn't a power. It was a prison sentence for her and for anyone who came close. Word spread faster than footsteps. Men returned home and told stories of something in the wastes. A woman with snakes for hair. A face that kills. They never agreed on the details. Some said she was 10 feet tall. Others swore she had fangs or claws or wings. But they all agreed on one thing. If you look at her, you die. Reality was less dramatic and more cruel. Medusa didn't hunt villages. She didn't stalk men in their sleep. She didn't leave her lair unless she had to. She was not a predator. She was a hazard. Like a cliff edge in thick fog, or a riptide beneath calm water. Dangerous, yes, but only if you came too close. So she learned to move differently, to turn her head away at the slightest sound, to speak to people when she had to, from behind boulders, from the shadowed mouth of a cave. Sometimes travelers would hear a voice from the rocks warning them off. Don't come closer. Turn back. For your sake, not mine. Those who listened lived. Those who didn't became part of the growing stone garden that ringed her exile. The statues accumulated. A soldier with his shield half raised. A young boy holding a bundle of firewood. A woman carrying a basket, petrified in mid-step, eyes wide with recognition and terror. Medusa remembered each encounter. Every accidental meeting, every gasp, every frozen expression. She tried to bury them, to cover them with rocks, to push them into ravines. But stone is patient. The wind stripped away the dirt. Time uncovered what she tried to hide. Soon, the land around her became a graveyard without graves. A museum of fear, curated against her will. At night, she spoke to them. It was an accident, she would whisper. I warned you. I didn't ask for this. The serpents hissed softly in the dark, as if agreeing. She started imagining their replies, not the accusations she heard in her own mind, but something gentler. You didn't choose this. You are not what they say. We are here because the gods were careless with you. Of course, the statues said nothing. But sometimes, silence is kinder than the world. Over time, something inside her hardened too. Not her heart. That stayed raw, tender, easily wounded. But her expectations. She stopped expecting to be understood. Stopped expecting rescue. Stopped imagining that Athena might appear one day, apologize, and lift the curse. The gods do not apologize. They move on. They forget. They leave mortals to live inside the consequences of divine moods. Medusa accepted a truth that many never want to face. No one was coming to save her. So she began to save what she could. Her sanity, her routines, the thin thread of self that existed beneath the word monster. She learned which caves stayed dry during storms, which herbs dulled the edge of constant fear, which paths let her move without crossing the tracks of hunters. She created a life inside the ruins of the one she'd lost. Not a happy life, but a real one. And slowly, the fear others felt toward her began to reflect back. Not because she hated them, but because they refused to see her. They saw a story, a challenge, a monster to defeat. She saw men who would rather chase legends than face the gods who made them happen. The world needed a villain. Someone to point at and say, "There, that's the danger." That woman. That face. It was easier than admitting the real danger. A god who could walk into a temple and take what he wanted. A goddess who could blame the victim and stay adored. So Medusa's exile served a purpose. It kept the story clean. The monster is out there. The world in here is safe. But the world never stays clean for long. One day, far away, on an island where a poor boy grew up with a mother the gods had also wronged, a king would say, "Bring me the head of Medusa." And a young man named Perseus, hungry for glory, would say yes. He wouldn't know her story. He wouldn't care what the gods had done. He would only know what everyone knew. Medusa is a monster. Slay the monster, and you become a hero. Out on the edge of the world, surrounded by stone and silence, Medusa had no idea a hero had been commissioned to kill her. She only knew the wind was changing. The seabirds were restless. The serpents on her head lifted, sensing something new on the horizon. Not a god this time, not a goddess. A mortal, carrying weapons blessed by those same gods, walking toward her, guided by a story in which she had never been allowed to speak. This is where exile ends, not with healing, not with justice. With a boy on a divine errand, and a woman who has spent too long being told she is a monster to believe she deserves anything else. Before he was a hero, he was just a boy trying to protect his mother. Perseus' story does not start with triumph. It starts with fear. Not his fear, his grandfather's. A prophecy once told King Acrisius that his own grandson would kill him. And like so many kings in so many myths, he decided he would rather break his family than risk his fate. So he locked his daughter, Danae, underground. A bronze chamber, windowless, sealed away from the world. No men, no marriage, no children. Problem solved, on paper. But the gods do not respect human plans. Zeus saw Danae in her prison and wanted her. Walls, locks, and iron were no obstacle. He came to her not as a man, but as a shower of gold. Poets describe this image with a kind of reverence, as if turning a salt into something beautiful changes what it was. However you dress it up, the truth is simple. Danae was imprisoned. A god entered her cell. She became pregnant. No one asked what she wanted. When Acrisius discovered the child, he faced a choice: kill them and risk divine wrath, or get rid of them and keep his hands technically clean. He chose the sea. Danae and her baby were sealed in a wooden chest and thrown into the waves. A slow, plausible deniability kind of death. If they drown, he could say, well, that's the sea's doing, not mine. But the chest did not sink. It drifted, rocked by waves, battered by wind. Danae clutched her son, whispering to him over the roar of water, not knowing if either of them would see another dawn. The prophecy lived in that box. So did desperation. Eventually, the chest washed ashore on a small island, Seriphos. A fisherman named Dictys found them, opened the lid, and chose something different from Acrisius: compassion. He took them in, raised Perseus as his own, gave Danae a home that wasn't a cell or a coffin. Perseus grew up hearing two things: that he was the son of Zeus, and that his mother had been badly wronged. But being divinely fathered didn't feed you, didn't protect you in a world where kings still did as they pleased. Seriphos' king, Polydectes, noticed Danae. Powerful men in myths always seem to notice women whose lives have already been shattered. They never read that as a reason to leave them in peace. Polydectes wanted her, not like a partner, like a possession. But Perseus was there, a grown son now, poor but strong, protective. Polydectes understood something fundamental. If he wanted Danae, he needed Perseus gone. Not killed outright, that could offend Zeus, or the islanders who loved the young man. No, something subtler, a noble task, a glorious mission, a trap wrapped in the language of honor. The king announced he was marrying another woman. A convenient lie. He invited everyone to bring a gift. Horses, gold, fine cloth. Perseus had nothing. No wealth, no land, no horses to his name. Polydectes mocked him in front of everyone. A calculated humiliation. You, son of Zeus, and you can't even bring me a proper gift? Perseus flushed with shame. The room watched. Laughter simmered. Backed into a corner, he did what many young men do when their worth is questioned publicly. He overcompensated. "I can bring you anything," he blurted out. "Anything you ask, even the head of Medusa." The hall fell silent. Medusa, the Gorgon, the monster at the edge of the world. Polydectes' eyes lit up. There it was, the perfect solution. "If that's your boast," he said smoothly, "then that will be your gift." No one expected Perseus to return. Was Perseus courageous? Yes. But courage born from a cornered boy's shame is different from the courage of someone who truly understands what he's walking into. He didn't seek out this quest because he hated Medusa. He didn't grow up dreaming of slaying monsters. He was maneuvered into it. His pride weaponized. His desperation turned into a mission. He accepted the quest not because he wanted to kill a Gorgon, but because he wanted to prove he wasn't worthless, because he wanted to protect his mother. In that sense, Perseus is not so different from Medusa. Both of their lives were shoved off course by the decisions of powerful men. Both carried the consequences of someone else's fear. If the story ended there, maybe we'd pity Perseus. But the gods were not done using him. As he left the island, unsure where to even find Medusa, help arrived. Athena and Hermes appeared. From Athena, he received a polished shield, bright enough to show a clear reflection. From Hermes, a sword sharp enough to slice through anything. Later, other gifts would follow. Winged sandals to carry him through the air. A cap of invisibility so he could vanish at will. A special bag to hold whatever he cut off. Perseus became, in effect, a walking divine project. Why did Athena help? She didn't explain herself. She rarely did. But we know what she wanted. Medusa's head. The priestess she had once cursed, the face she had once made lethal, was now raw material for a weapon, a symbol she intended to wear. Perseus was the courier. The mortal hand acting out a god's unfinished business. Equipped with gifts he did not ask for, chasing a monster he had never met, Perseus stepped into a story that had started long before he was born. He needed directions. You can't just wander until you bump into a Gorgon. So he sought out the Graeae, 3 withered sisters, older than the gods themselves, who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them. Shadows of another trio of sisters, the Fates, who controlled life and death. The Graeae knew where the Gorgons lived. They also knew what happened to those who went looking for them. Perseus did what heroes in Greek myth often do when faced with fragile, ancient women. He stole from them. He waited until they passed the eye between them, snatched it midair, and held it just out of reach. "Tell me how to find Medusa," he said, "or you never get this back." No negotiation, no respect, just leverage, desperation mixed with entitlement. They told him. Of course they did. What choice did they have? He gave the eye back, or so the story goes, and left them in darkness. Another small wound in a story full of larger ones. As he flew toward the edge of the world, Perseus heard plenty of stories about Medusa. None of them mentioned a temple, or Poseidon, or Athena's curse. To him, she was exactly what the song said: a monster, an obstacle, a test. The world had edited her down to a useful symbol. By the time her name reached his ears, all the inconvenient details were gone. Nobody told him he was hunting a victim, and he never asked. When he finally found the Gorgon's lair, it did not look like a fortress. It looked like a place the world had already abandoned. The sky was heavy. The air felt tired. Statues stood scattered among the rocks, not carved by artists, but captured mid-movement. A hand shielding a face, a half-turn away, a body leaning backward in surprise. Perseus felt a shiver run through him. Not pity, not yet, just confirmation. The stories were true. Look at her, and you die. I won't look at her, he thought. I'm smarter than that. He raised Athena's shield, letting the polished surface catch the light. In its reflection, he saw three figures, grotesque at first glance: scales, serpents, wings, but also stillness, exhaustion. The sisters were sleeping. Medusa's chest rose and fell slowly. Her snakes rested, curled like tired hands. This was the moment, the safest he would ever get. Perseus tightened his grip on the sword. Courage, we're told, is facing danger despite fear. But what do we call it when the danger is unconscious? When your enemy is asleep, unarmed, unaware? Heroism. The myth insists. Efficiency, the gods might say. But from her side of the story, it's something else. Execution. Assassination. He moved forward carefully, stepping between the statues, eyes fixed on the shield, breath shallow, closer. The reflection of her face grew larger, not roaring, not lunging, just lying there. We can imagine a moment. He sees her, really sees her. Not the monster in stories, just a woman who looks like she hasn't slept in years. Maybe something tightens in his chest. Maybe a small, unwelcome thought appears. What if? No. The king. The humiliation. His mother. The gods watching. When you are raised in a world that praises dragon slayers, you do not stop and ask the dragon how it got there. You just raise the sword and swing. Steel met flesh. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then, a sound. Not a roar. Not a curse. Just the wet, awful truth of a body being separated from itself. Blood arced through the air. Snakes lashed wildly, then fell limp. And from the wound, from the neck of a woman who had once been a priestess, two beings burst into the world. Pegasus, the winged horse. Chrysaor, the warrior with a golden sword. Her children. Born at the moment, she died. Perseus didn't stop to wonder what it meant. He did what he came to do. He shoved the head into the bag. He fled. Behind him, Steno and Euryale woke to the smell of blood and the sound of absence. By the time they understood what had happened, the man responsible was already in the air, carried away on borrowed wings and borrowed courage. From that day forward, Perseus's story sounded simple when told in taverns and temples. He faced the Gorgon. He cut off her head. He survived. But that's not what really happened. He never faced her. Not truly. He never looked her in the eyes. He never heard her speak. He never knew what had been done to her. He killed a stranger in her sleep on divine instructions and called it heroism because everyone told him it was. He didn't question that. Most heroes don't. Because questioning the story that makes you a hero means risking becoming something else. A tool. An accomplice. Or worse. A man who did a terrible thing for reasons that were never really his. Our Perseus will go on to use her head as a weapon. He will save a woman named Andromeda. He will turn a tyrant king and his men to stone to save his mother. He will bring justice, of a sort, with the power he stole from a woman who had never received any. He will live a long life. He will be honored. He will be placed in the stars. Even then, in the night sky, he will still be shown holding the head of Medusa, his heroism defined forever by her death. But the truth remains, Perseus was not born a monster slayer. He was shaped into one, by a fearful king, by ambitious gods, by a culture that needed monsters more than it needed uncomfortable truths. And Medusa? She was never given the chance to be anything but what that same culture needed from her. A target, a test, a head in a bag, before the snakes, before the stone, before the name Medusa meant terror. She was looked at. That was her first curse. Men's eyes followed her everywhere, not because of who she was, because of what she looked like. The poets say her hair was extraordinary. Long, bright, flowing like liquid gold. It drew attention the way fire does in the dark. People gathered around it, around her, not to ask what she believed, what she wanted, what she dreamed of. They just stared. When Poseidon walked into Athena's temple, he didn't see a person at an altar. He saw something he wanted. Her beauty became the doorway through which violence entered. The gaze, which should have been admiration, turned into entitlement. After that, the myth does something brutal and brilliant at the same time. It inverts the rules. Before, being looked at made Medusa unsafe. After Athena's curse, being looked at makes everyone else unsafe. If you look at Medusa now, you don't possess her. You don't conquer her. You don't enjoy her. You freeze. You turn to stone where you stand, caught in the act of looking. The male gaze, weaponized against itself. On one level, the curse is a punishment. Athena takes what Medusa was praised for, her hair, and turns it into serpents. She takes the face that drew desire and makes it unendurable. But look again. There is a twisted kind of protection in this curse. No one will ever touch Medusa again. No one will ever corner her in a temple again. No one will ever force themselves on her again. The moment they try to get close, the moment they dare to look directly, they die. Her body becomes a fortress. Her face becomes a shield. The same thing that once made her vulnerable now makes everyone else vulnerable. That's what trauma often does in real life. Someone is hurt. They survive. But survival comes at a cost. Walls go up. Trust disappears. The person becomes guarded, sharp, difficult to approach. They grow armor. From the outside, that armor looks cold, hard, stone-hearted. From the inside, it feels like the only way to stay alive. Medusa is that experience turned into myth. Her curse is the ultimate defense mechanism. You cannot hurt me if you cannot even look at me. Now think about stone. Stone doesn't feel, doesn't move, doesn't change. When people look at Medusa and turn to stone, they freeze in the exact posture of their last feeling: shock, terror, curiosity. It's trauma, crystallized. So many survivors describe this. The moment of violence doesn't sit in the past. It keeps replaying. Their body remembers. Their nervous system hits freeze and stays there. It's not that they won't move on. It's that their whole being learned that moving is dangerous. The myth makes that visible. Look at the victim's pain the wrong way, with voyeurism or entitlement, and you freeze too. You lose the ability to grow. But here's a detail the myth quietly slips in. Not everyone who sees Medusa turns to stone. Perseus survives. Why? He doesn't look at her directly. He uses a reflection in a bronze shield. He keeps a distance. He moves carefully. In modern terms, he practices a kind of emotional indirectness. That's not entirely heroic in his case. He's avoiding consequences while killing her. But symbolically, there's a lesson there. If you want to approach someone's trauma, you can't just march in, demand their story, stare at their wounds. Direct, invasive staring petrifies people. Gentle, reflective attention, approaching with caution, humility, and respect, is what allows connection without harm. Medusa destroys those who come at her with hunger, conquest, curiosity without care. She only spares the one who looks sideways. We can read that as a warning. Don't consume other people's pain as entertainment. Don't gawk. Don't demand details to satisfy your own curiosity. Look with empathy, not appetite. There's also rage in that face. The snakes, the bared teeth, the wide, furious eyes. Medusa isn't depicted as weeping, delicate, or quietly broken. She's terrifying. That's not an accident. Patriarchal cultures have always been more frightened by female anger than by female suffering. A woman crying is sad. A woman raging is crazy, dangerous, too much. Medusa is female rage cranked all the way up. So intense that a single glance stops the world. Her fury is not random. It's not villainous temperament. It's the natural outcome of being desired, being violated, being blamed, being cursed, being exiled. What did the world expect her to feel? Gratitude? The myth says, when women's anger finally becomes visible, we will call it monstrous and build legends around how dangerous it is. But from her side, that gaze is simply justice, with no more patience left. The system, of course, cannot tolerate that kind of uncontrolled rage. So what does Athena do after Perseus kills Medusa? She cuts the anger off from its body and straps it to a shield. Medusa's head, the same gaze, the same snakes, the same power, is now safe. Not because it's weaker, because it's controlled. No longer belongs to a victim. Now belongs to a goddess. No longer threatens the order, now protects it. The very power born from injustice is repurposed to defend the system that caused the injustice. That's what happens to anger all the time. A woman's rage in private is hysterical. The same anger, polished and detached, turned into a slogan or marketable image, can be sold on t-shirts and corporate campaigns. The fire is kept, but the story that lit it is erased. Medusa's head on Athena's aegis is that dynamic in stone. Pure power. No context. And yet, even severed, even controlled, Medusa's gaze is never fully tamed. It still turns enemies to stone. It still stops armies. It still haunts shields, temples, and now museum walls. Her rage refuses to die just because the story wants it to. That's why her image keeps returning. In poetry, paintings, tattoos, essays, protests, something in us recognizes the truth behind those eyes. When we really look at Medusa today, we're not just seeing a monster, we're seeing how dangerous it is to objectify people, how violently the world reacts to female anger, how trauma both protects and isolates, how systems domesticate the very rage they created. To stare into Medusa's face now is not to turn to stone, but to be stopped by recognition. You see what was done to her. You see the pattern around you. You see the ways you've been taught to fear the wrong person. If that realization freezes you for a moment, good. You were never meant to walk past her story unchanged. Stories don't just get told. They get edited, simplified, smoothed over, weaponized. Medusa's story is almost 3,000 years old. That's a lot of time for people to cut pieces out, add new ones, and turn a complicated woman into a convenient symbol. So tonight, we're going to walk through time. Not to change what happened to her, that's locked in myth, but to see how we kept changing what we say it means. Because Medusa didn't just become a monster once. We've been remaking her as a monster. Again and again and again. From Hesiod to Ovid, adding the wound. At the very beginning, in Hesiod's Theogony, Medusa is almost a footnote. 3 Gorgons, Stheno, Euryale, Medusa, daughters of ancient sea gods, 2 immortal, 1 mortal, no temple, no assault, no priestess, just a strange, lethal being on the edge of the world, killed in her sleep by Perseus. She appears, she dies, and from her neck leap Pegasus and Chrysaor, children of Poseidon. There's no explanation of how that happened. No one pauses long enough to ask. Centuries later, Ovid comes along in Rome and decides that gap matters. He takes the bare outline and does something risky. He gives Medusa a before, a human face, a life, a temple. He tells us she was once beautiful, a priestess of Athena. He tells us Poseidon saw her, desired her, took her by force in the goddess's temple. He tells us Athena looked away, then punished the mortal woman instead of the god. In that one move, Medusa stops being an anonymous monster and becomes something far more dangerous to the status quo. A victim, a wronged woman, a wound that refuses to be treated as just myth. Ovid doesn't turn Medusa into a saint. He still lets Perseus kill her. He still gives Athena the head. The heroic structure remains. But now there's a crack running straight through it. The monster we're told to cheer against was once a girl who did nothing wrong. The story could have gone in a new direction from there. The Greeks and Romans could have leaned into the tragedy. They could have started asking hard questions about gods and justice. Instead, something else happened. The Middle Ages, cutting out the inconvenient parts. When Christianity spread through Europe, the old Greek and Roman myths didn't disappear. They were repurposed. Medusa survived, but the assault often didn't. Medieval writers and preachers loved her as a symbol of deadly female beauty, sin, vanity, the danger of lust. She became a kind of walking sermon illustration. Look what happens if you give in to desire. You become like Medusa, hideous and damning. The snakes in her hair linked neatly to the serpent in Eden, and suddenly she was standing in for Eve, for temptation, for all the things women were told never to be. Her backstory as a violated priestess, too messy, too sympathetic, too contradictory to the message that women's bodies cause sin. So it faded. The victim vanished. The monster stayed. It's a pattern we still see today. If a part of a story makes powerful people uncomfortable, that part gets quietly edited out. The Renaissance. Beauty in a severed head. Centuries later, Europe falls in love with antiquity again. The Renaissance arrives, and artists rush back to the Greek and Roman myths looking for drama, muscle, movement, emotion. And what do they find? A hero holding up a severed head with writhing snakes and staring eyes. Perfect. Paintings, sculptures, engravings, ceremonial shields. Caravaggio paints Medusa's head on a shield, blood at the neck, shock in the eyes, the exact moment of death, immortalized. Benvenuto Cellini sculpts Perseus standing on Medusa's body, her head held aloft like a prize. People marvel at the anatomy, at the drama, at the virtuosic bronze and paint. Few ask, why are we celebrating a man standing on a woman's corpse? The art world makes a choice here, whether consciously or not. Medusa is most interesting as an object, not as a person, not as a story, as an image. The more realistic the horror looks, the more brilliant the artist is considered. The more convincingly a dead woman's head is rendered, the more applause. Whatever was left of Medusa's human story dissolves further. She is now a composition challenge, a dramatic motif, a decorative emblem. Her pain becomes a technical exercise. Romanticism, the first flicker of sympathy. Then the mood shifts again. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Romantic movement is blossoming. Artists and poets are obsessed with tragic beauty, misunderstood figures, lonely, suffering souls. Suddenly a severed, horrified head isn't just grotesque. It's moving. Percy Bysshe Shelley writes about Medusa after seeing a painting of her. He doesn't just see a monster, he sees a horror of the heart, beauty twisted by something terrible, an almost unbearable mixture of terror and pity. For the first time in a long time, a major voice looks at Medusa and says, "This is sad." That might not sound radical, but for a figure who'd spent centuries as a symbol of sin and threat, it is. Sympathy creeps back into the story. Not yet a full defense, but the door is cracked open. Freud arrives, turning her into a male fear. In the early 1900s, Sigmund Freud looks at Medusa and sees something else. He reads her through psychoanalysis and declares she represents male castration anxiety. The snakes, the open mouth, the paralyzing fear. In his interpretation, they're all about men's terror of female sexuality. Medusa's head, in Freud's hands, stops being her story at all. It becomes a diagram of male fear. Once again, Medusa is not a person. She's a signboard, a symbol on which someone else projects their theory. And again, her assault vanishes. Her transformation becomes all about him. The monster is now officially a Rorschach test for male anxiety. Chart the 20th century. Two Medusas, side by side. By the mid-late 1900s, Medusa lives a double life. On one side, popular culture keeps her in the old role. Boss monster in fantasy, scary head in video games, villain in adventure stories. She pops up in comics, cartoons, movies, usually as a creature whose power must be overcome so the hero can progress. Her head remains a weapon. Her backstory, if mentioned at all, is a quick line and then forgotten. On the other side, scholars and some poets begin revisiting Ovid. They remember the temple, the violation, the curse. They ask, if she was punished for being raped, doesn't that change everything? The answer, of course, is yes, but mass culture is slow to catch up to scholarly discomfort. So we have two Medusas existing at once. One, the old monster, pure obstacle, pure threat. Two, the new Medusa emerging in essays and classrooms, a victim caught in a divine power game. They look the same on the outside, but the meaning underneath couldn't be more different. Feminism cracks the mirror. In the 1970s, feminist thinkers stopped being polite about it. Helen Sixus writes The Laugh of the Medusa and says, "Look at her. Straight on. She's not deadly. She's beautiful. And she's laughing." That one line detonates centuries of interpretation. Sixus argues that patriarchy needed Medusa to be terrifying because it needed women's power, especially sexual and creative power, to be horrifying. If men fear what women could be, then they will believe stories that turn that fear into monsters. But if women look at Medusa and see themselves, their rage, their pain, their strength, then the whole structure wobbles. Suddenly, Medusa is no longer simply what happens when women are evil. She's what happens when women are silenced. What happens when women are blamed? What happens when women's anger finally refuses to disappear? Her face becomes a mirror for women, not a warning for men. From there, other feminist writers, artists, and activists begin picking up her image and changing its use, from warning to weapon, from curse to emblem, from beware her to she's with me. The same head that once hung on Perseus's arm ends up on protest banners, tattoos, book covers. The message shifts from look what he conquered to look what she survived. Modern culture. The tug-of-war continues. Today, Medusa lives in a strange tension. Open a mythology handbook or watch a fantasy movie, and chances are you'll still see the classic monster. Snake hair, petrifying gaze, hero with a sword. That version is easy to animate, easy to gamify, easy to slot into a story as the boss level. But if you step into certain corners of literature, art, and activism, you'll meet another Medusa, a girl in a temple, a victim of a god, a woman who was turned into the monster they needed her to be. Some novels retell the entire myth through her eyes. Some TV shows hint at her backstory, then bury it under spectacle. Some artworks give her back her body, her softness, her complexity. Others lean into the snakes, but change the feeling. Not horror, but defiance. What we're watching, in real time, is a fight over meaning. Who gets to own Medusa, the old story or the new one? The answer, at least for now, is both. The monstrous Medusa is not going away. She's too embedded, too visually striking, too useful as a symbol of fear. But the reclaimed Medusa is growing louder, more visible, harder to ignore. And every time someone learns the full story, Temple, Poseidon, Athena's punishment, it becomes more difficult to casually cheer when Perseus raises his sword. Why this evolution matters? You might ask, okay, interesting literary history, but why does it matter what we think of an imaginary woman with snakes for hair? Because Medusa is a test case. How we treat her story reveals how we treat real people who live similar patterns. If we're comfortable erasing the assault and keeping the monster, we are more likely to doubt real survivors, emphasize their danger or anger, sympathize with their attackers' reputations. If we're willing to see Medusa as a victim flattened into a villain, we're more likely to notice victim-blaming language. Ask whose perspective is missing. Hesitate before calling someone a monster simply because a powerful voice says so. The evolution of Medusa, from nameless monster to tragic figure to male fear diagram to feminist icon, is really the evolution of us. It shows what each era is willing to see, what it needs to hide, what it fears, what it hopes for. Right now, we live in a time where hidden stories of violence are surfacing everywhere. The Me Too movement, abuse scandals in institutions, whistleblowers and survivors speaking out. Medusa fits right into that landscape. A woman whose story was buried, whose pain was turned into a warning sign, whose head became a trophy. And now, at last, we're starting to say, wait, what actually happened to her? That question, as simple as it sounds, is revolutionary. As you lie there, eyes getting heavier, just notice this. A myth you might have learned as a child. Hero kills monster. Turns out not to be so simple. The more we look, the more layers we find. And if that's true for Medusa, it's probably true for many other monsters, both in stories and in life. In the next chapter, we'll step away from the long arc of history and zoom in on two nearly forgotten figures. Medusa's immortal sisters, who loved a mortal sibling they could not save, and had to live forever with that loss. For now, let your thoughts soften. Let the images blur. Not just the screaming head, but the girl in the temple. Not just the snakes, but the hands that once braided that hair. The story is still changing. And you're now part of the reason why. We've spent so long staring into Medusa's eyes that it's easy to forget something simple and devastating. She wasn't alone. She was never meant to be alone. Medusa had sisters, 2 of them, and their names, rarely remembered, are Athena and Euryale. Most people hear Gorgons and picture one face, one head, one scream, one crown of snakes. But in the oldest versions of the myth, the Gorgons are a trio. 3 beings sharing a fate, a home, a legend. Yet only one of them can die. 3 sisters, one crack in eternity. In Hesiod's telling, the basics are simple. Athena, Euryale, Medusa, daughters of sea deities, Phorcys and Ceto, born far from human lands, beyond the known world. There's a quiet, eerie little detail buried there. Athena and Euryale are immortal. Medusa is not. Why? No explanation, no commentary. Just a fault line running through the family. 2 sisters are carved from the stone of eternity. The third is made of flesh, and deadline, and endings. If we read this together with Ovid's later version, the picture sharpens. Athena and Euryale seem to belong to the old order, ancient, primordial, monstrous from the start. Medusa feels different. She has a before, a human life, a temple, a body that once moved through the world without turning it to stone. Her mortality makes sense if she became a Gorgon, rather than being born as one. Her sisters are creatures of mythic night. Medusa is a woman dragged into that night and forced to stay. The moment everything breaks, most versions of the story agree on this. Perseus doesn't fight Medusa in a fair battle. He doesn't stride in, announce his name, and cross blades with her under a blood-red sky. He sneaks in while she sleeps, in the dark. One precise stroke. A head separated from a body before she can even open her eyes. Now imagine the scene from the sisters' side. You are Athena or Euryale. You have lived for ages. You have watched the world shift, heroes rise and fall, cities appear and crumble like sandcastles in a storm. You have one vulnerable thing in your endless life, a mortal sister. You go to sleep beside her, as you have done for countless nights. You wake up, and the air is wrong. There is blood where breath should be, silence where a heartbeat should be. Medusa's body is there, but her face, the face you've known since she was a frightened girl stumbling into exile, is gone. You look up just in time to see a figure in the distance, winged sandals flashing, a bag that seems to move. You scream. You chase. But he vanishes. He has a cap that makes him invisible, all the gifts of gods on his side, and you have only grief and fury. You cannot catch him. You cannot stop him. You cannot even die of heartbreak. You are immortal. This is your forever now. Eternal life, eternal mourning. Immortality sounds like a blessing until you pair it with irreversible loss. Stheno and Euryale are cursed in their own way. They never outgrow their grief. They never reach acceptance. There is no final chapter for them. Every age that passes is just another age in which Medusa is still dead. We often focus on Medusa's isolation, her exile at the edge of the world. But they are exiled too. They lose their only mortal anchor, the one who remembered being human, the one who still knew about temples and sunlight and the sound of laughter that doesn't echo off cave walls. Now the two immortals are left alone with their monstrousness and their memory of the one who was different. That's another kind of punishment the myth never names, being forced to survive someone you couldn't protect. The hidden victims, families of the monster. When we talk about victims, we usually talk about the person harmed directly. But trauma doesn't stop with one body. It ripples into sisters, parents, lovers, friends, children. Stheno and Euryale are myth's way of saying, look, the story didn't end at the neck. There were people who loved her, people whose lives shattered when she died. In real life, we see this pattern everywhere. A woman is assaulted, and her siblings live with the guilt of not knowing, not preventing, not seeing the signs. Someone is killed, and their family carries a grief that doesn't fit into court records or news headlines. A victim is turned into a monster by the public, and their loved ones are left fighting a version of them they don't recognize. The myth almost forgets to mention the sisters. Most later retellings do. They get one or two lines. Her immortal sisters pursued Perseus, but failed. Then vanish. But if you sit with that image, two immortal beings screaming over a mortal sister's body, it's very hard to go back to cheering for Perseus with a clean conscience. Why stories erase the sisters? Think about how the story feels if we leave Stheno and Euryale in it. Perseus isn't just killing a monster. He's ending a family. He's not striking down a lone threat in the wilderness. He's shattering the only fragile relationship that tied two immortals to anything soft and human. That makes his act harder to celebrate. So over time, storytellers quietly trim. The sisters get less dialogue. Then they get no dialogue. Then they're just other Gorgons. Then sometimes they're not there at all. It's neater that way. Perseus gets his clear-cut victory. The audience doesn't have to imagine the sound of two immortals howling Medusa's name. The same thing happens in real stories of violence. We zoom in on the hero or the villain, and everyone orbiting them, families, siblings, partners, gets blurred out. Their pain isn't convenient, so it doesn't get screen time. Stheno and Euryale as symbols of solidarity. Modern feminist readings have started to bring the sisters back into focus. They see Stheno and Euryale as the women who stand beside a victim, who refuse to abandon her, who rage when she's harmed, who chase the man who killed her, even when they know they can't win. They are what Athena was not. Athena had power and chose politics over protection. The sisters have almost no political power and choose loyalty over everything. They don't negotiate, they don't strategize, they scream, they pursue, they mourn. In that raw, unfiltered response, there's a kind of fierce, painful love. They become symbols of the friend who believes you immediately, the sibling who says, "I'm with you, no matter what this costs me," the women who show up at court, at protests, in group chats, refusing to let a story be buried. Every Medusa needs someone like that, someone who doesn't ask, "What did you do to cause this?" but instead says, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. Tell me what you need." The myth doesn't give Medusa justice, but it does give her witnesses, and witnesses matter. Monsters in a story that forgot them. There's a quieter tragedy hiding here too. Stheno and Euryale are monstrous from the start, at least in most tellings. That means we never get their before, their first realization that humans fear them, their own grief at being born outside the world. What if they once tried to approach humans gently, only to see people turn to stone? What if they learned, over long, painful centuries, to stay away, to become the thing everyone already believed they were? By the time Medusa arrives, they may already be experts in distance and caution, teaching their mortal sister, "Don't go too close. Don't look them in the eyes. Don't expect them to understand." And then they lose her anyway. We're so used to thinking in binaries, human versus monster, hero versus villain, that we rarely stop to ask, what hurts did the monsters carry before we ever met them? Stheno and Euryale are like the shadow of that question, barely sketched in, but haunting once you notice them. Remembering who was standing beside her. So what do we do with these nearly forgotten sisters? We can't give them more lines in the ancient plays. We can't rewrite Hesiod. But we can choose, every time we tell Medusa's story, to say their names. We can remember that when Perseus swung his sword, it wasn't just one life he changed. He carved a permanent wound into two beings who could never heal by dying. And in our own lives, we can remember the Sthenos and Euryales around us, the sibling who holds a survivor's hand, the friend who believes first, questions later, the people whose grief is real even though they weren't the ones directly harmed. Medusa's myth is about what happens when a victim is turned into a monster. Her sister's tiny overlooked part of the story is about what happens to the ones who love that monster and have to live forever in the space her absence leaves behind. As your body gets heavier against the bed, just hold one thought gently. Even at the edge of the world, even with snakes for hair and a curse in her eyes, Medusa was a sister. Someone loved her. Someone tried to chase after the man who took her away. Someone is still, in the logic of myth, mourning her beyond the sunset. We tend to remember the heroes and the monsters, but it's often the witnesses, the Sthenos and Euryales, who carry the longest, heaviest part of the story. In the next chapter, we'll return to Athena and look even more closely at what her choice to punish Medusa reveals about power, survival, and the painful ways women can be turned against each other. For now, you don't have to solve any of it. Just breathe. Let the names drift. Medusa, Stheno, Euryale, three sisters at the edge of the world. Only one could die. None of them were ever truly monsters until someone else's story said they were. Athena is supposed to be the one you can trust, goddess of wisdom, goddess of strategy, protector of cities, patron of heroes. And for Medusa, worst of all, she was the goddess Medusa served. When you think about Medusa's story as a story of violence, Athena becomes the most painful character to look at. Not Poseidon, not Perseus, but her. Because she's the one who could have protected Medusa, and didn't. Athena, a woman inside a man-made order. Athena is one of the most powerful goddesses in Greek myth, but she is powerful on very specific terms. She is Zeus's favorite daughter. She is born from his head, fully armed. She is brilliant, strategic, disciplined, controlled. She is proudly, permanently virgin. Unlike Aphrodite, she is not associated with desire. Unlike Hera, she is not a wife guarding a marriage. Unlike Demeter, she is not a mother whose power comes from her children. Athena's power is acceptable because it is non-sexual and aligned with male institutions: warfare, politics, law, the city. In other words, she is a woman who has earned a seat at the table of the gods by never threatening male control over sex, family, or desire. She is the goddess of the polished world, armies, councils, city walls, and Medusa? She belongs to everything Athena's world wants to control. Wild beauty, uncontrollable desire, even if unwanted, violated vows of chastity, a body that becomes a battlefield. Athena is the woman who made it in a man's world. Medusa is the woman that world chews up, and they meet in one terrible moment in a temple filled with silence and stone. The temple, the crime, the choice. Let's replay the scene Ovid gives us, but from Athena's side. Athena's temple is supposed to be a refuge, a place of quiet, of rules, of sacredness. Her priestesses are expected to mirror her. Chaste, disciplined, untouched Medusa is one of them. A girl dedicated to the goddess, serving in a space that should be the safest place in her world. Then Poseidon walks in, one of the 12 Olympians, lord of the seas, earthquakes, storms, Zeus's brother. He sees Medusa. He wants her. And in this mythological universe, a god's desire is treated almost like a force of nature, dangerous, unstoppable, and never truly accountable. He seizes her. He forces himself on her, right there, on Athena's floor. A violation of Medusa's body, Medusa's vows, Athena's temple, Athena's authority. The story tells us Athena turns her eyes away. She sees enough to know what's happening. She sees enough to know who is doing it. But she chooses not to see it fully. Already, that's a choice. What could Athena have done? If we pause the myth right there, we can ask the question the story never does. What were Athena's options? 1. Confront Poseidon or call what he did a violation. O. Demand justice for her priestess. O. Insist the temple's sanctity matters even against an equal. But Poseidon is not some minor spirit she can bully. He's her uncle, a major god, a political equal at the top of the pantheon. A direct confrontation risks, O angering Zeus, O creating a divine feud, O destabilizing the balance among the Olympians. 2. Protect Medusa, blame Poseidon, O declare Medusa innocent. O recognize that vows violated by force are not broken by choice. O offer sanctuary rather than punishment. But that would mean O publicly acknowledging that Athena's own temple was not safe from male power, O admitting her priestesses can't actually rely on her protection, O exposing her limits. 3. Do what she actually does, O treat Medusa as the problem, O treat the desecration as Medusa's pollution, O punish the victim instead of the god, O restore her authority symbolically, by making Medusa's body bear the mark of wrongdoing. Only the third option leaves Athena's status untouched. Only that one allows her to remain the flawless goddess of order, purity, and control. So she chooses it. She turns her priestess into a monster. The logic of victim blaming as self-defense. On the surface, Athena's punishment looks like pure cruelty. But underneath, it's the same logic we see in real institutions all the time. If I admit that someone with less power was harmed under my watch, I admit I couldn't protect them. So it must be their fault. In real life, this sounds like, why was she alone? Why did she wear that? Why didn't she report it sooner? She knew what he was like, and still went there. The unspoken part is, because if it's not her fault, then the system I trust is broken in ways I can't bear to face. Athena can't bear the idea that her temple, her domain, her rules, mean nothing when a powerful male god decides otherwise. So she rewrites reality. Medusa becomes impure, polluted, dangerous. The temple isn't unsafe anymore. It has simply expelled the polluting element. Athena's world stays orderly. Her status remains intact. The cost? One woman's life. Women in power and the trap of complicity. It's easy to make Athena the villain and leave it at that. But her position mirrors something excruciatingly familiar. A woman rises high inside a male-dominated system. A company, a political party, a religious institution, a prestigious school she's praised for being not like the other women. Tough, rational, emotionally contained, able to take a joke, never too sensitive. Then someone lower in the hierarchy, another woman, often younger, less protected, comes forward and says, I was harassed. I was assaulted. I was abused. The woman in power now has a choice a lot like Athena's. Defend the vulnerable and risk her own position, access, and credibility. Or defend the system and stay safe. Too often, she questions the victim's story, minimizes the harm, encourages silence for everyone's good, quietly supports the man in power. It's not because she's secretly evil. It's because she knows how fragile her place is. She has learned, painfully, that the system will tolerate her power only if she never turns it against the system itself. That's Athena's bind. She can be a powerful goddess of wisdom and war, as long as she doesn't challenge the entitlement of male gods like Poseidon. So she does what so many real women in power do. She survives by sacrificing someone more vulnerable than herself. It's still wrong, but it is horribly understandable. The severed head and the guilty shield. Athena's story with Medusa doesn't end at the curse. Once Perseus kills Medusa, he brings the head back like a trophy. And what does Athena do? She mounts it on her aegis, her shield or breastplate, and carries it with her into battle. The face she punished. The woman she failed. The victim she turned into a monster now becomes her emblem. On one level, this is pure appropriation. Medusa's rage, her power to petrify, all that's been torn from her body and handed to the goddess who destroyed her life. Athena turns a victim's cursed power into a state weapon, personal trauma into institutional armor. That's what systems do with the anger of the people they hurt. They take the language of resistance and rebrand it as marketing. They take symbols of protest and sell them on t-shirts. They take the gaze that once challenged them and frame it on their own terms. But there's another way to look at it. And it's messier. What if Athena can't forget what she did? What if the aegis is also a kind of confession she never speaks aloud? Every time she lifts that shield, she's forced to confront Medusa's eyes, the eyes she chose not to meet in that temple. Every victory she wins with the Gorgon's face, every battle she survives because that head turns enemies to stone, is another reminder that her power now quite literally rests on a woman she sacrificed. In that sense, the aegis becomes a weapon, a warning, a burden, a piece of guilt hammered into metal and carried forever. Internalized patriarchy. Athena as enforcer. We like to think patriarchy is enforced only by men, but Medusa's story shows something harsher. Sometimes the most effective enforcers are women in power. Athena polices chastity, respectability, purity. She is less forgiving of fallen women than the male gods are, because her own authority is built on not being like them. The message sliding under her behavior. I succeeded by following the rules that men set for me. If you break those rules, you endanger all of us, and I will be the one to punish you. That's internalized patriarchy in divine form. You see it today when older women leaders tell younger women to stop making a fuss about harassment. Women judges question rape victims more harshly than their male colleagues. Women politicians defend policies that hurt other women, because that's how the game is played. They are not powerless, but their power runs through structures built by and for men. To keep it, they must act as gatekeepers, not rebels. Athena is the Olympian prototype of that dynamic. She doesn't just fail to protect Medusa. She helps the system neutralize Medusa, then weaponizes the remains. What does wisdom look like now? Athena is the goddess of wisdom. But in this story, her wisdom looks like cold strategy. Protect the hierarchy, protect your status, convert a problem into a tool. By that metric, her actions are smart. By our metric, the metric of justice, empathy, solidarity, they're catastrophic. So here's a question the myth throws at us. What kind of wisdom do we actually admire? The wisdom that keeps you safe at any cost, keeps systems stable even when they're unjust, lets you sleep at night because you didn't look too closely, or the wisdom that risks status to tell the truth, protects the vulnerable even at personal cost, looks straight at what's wrong and names it? Greek myth rarely rewards this second kind of wisdom, but maybe we can. Athena, Medusa, and us. It's easy to say, I would never do what Athena did. But the real question is softer and closer to home. When have I looked away because looking directly would cost me too much? When have I quietly believed the system because I needed to believe I was safe inside it? When have I been more angry at the person who broke the silence than at the person who broke the rule? Athena's choice isn't just a divine drama. It's a pattern. In offices, in families, in communities, in movements. People with some power, but not all the power, are asked to decide whether they will protect those below them or stay in good standing with those above them. Athena chooses up, not down. She chooses Zeus and Poseidon over Medusa. Every time someone in our world chooses reputation over responsibility, we are watching her choice replay itself. How do we refuse Athena's bargain? We can't go back into the myth and pull Medusa out of the temple. We can't whisper in Athena's ear, protect her. It's worth it. But in our own small temples, our workplaces, friendships, families, we do get to choose differently. Refusing Athena's bargain looks like believing the person with less power even when it's inconvenient, challenging the person with more power even when it's risky, refusing to use someone's pain as a tool to polish your own image. Not turning victims into symbols without listening to what they actually need. It also means we have to be honest about the Athenians inside us. The parts that want to look away. The parts that want to keep our lives neat and unharmed by other people's trouble. Wisdom, the kind of wisdom that is actually worthy of a goddess, might be the opposite of what Athena shows here. Not, how do I survive this? But, how do I act justly, even if I don't survive untouched? Tonight, as your body loosens and your eyes grow heavy, you don't have to solve Athena. You don't have to excuse her. You don't have to condemn her absolutely. You can just hold this complicated truth. Medusa was betrayed not only by men with obvious power, but by a woman with power who chose the system over her. Athena carries Medusa's head forever, on her shield, in her legend, in the stories we tell about both of them. They are bound together now, the victim and the woman who failed her. The question that lingers for us isn't, was Athena evil? It's, when power and justice collide in my own life, who will I choose to be? Let that question settle somewhere quiet in you as you drift toward sleep. You don't need an answer tonight, just the willingness to look straight at the story without turning away. Something even a goddess of wisdom couldn't manage. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a gallery. Polished floor, soft lights, silence broken only by footsteps and the faint echo of whispers. On the walls and pedestals, marble, bronze, oil on canvas. You turn a corner, and there she is. A face twisted in shock and fury, mouth open as if mid-scream, snakes writhing around her head. Medusa, not alive, not speaking, just a head, just an object on display. For centuries, men have crossed rooms like this, princes, cardinals, tourists, school groups, and stopped in front of her the way you're doing now, safe in the knowledge that nothing terrible will happen if they look. Because in the myth, gazing at Medusa is death, but in art history, gazing at Medusa is culture. That contradiction is where this chapter lives. The woman you must not look at, and the art that won't stop looking Medusa's curse, is simple and brutal. If you look at me, you turn to stone. Her gaze is supposed to protect her. It stops any attacker in his tracks. Her face is the one place the male gaze cannot safely land. So what does patriarchy do with a woman it's not allowed to look at? It finds a workaround. It kills her, cuts off her head. And then, once she's safely dead, disarmed, unable to look back, it paints her, sculpts her, etches her into shields, hangs her on palace walls, carves her onto coins, brands her onto armor. The woman whose eyes must never be met is suddenly everywhere. Her face is on display precisely because she has been silenced. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. Caravaggio's shield. Horror as decoration picture a round convex surface. It looks like a shield, but it's actually a painting on wood. On it, Medusa's head at the exact moment of death. Eyes wide, mouth open, blood spilling from the severed neck, snakes flailing in shock. This is Caravaggio's Medusa. It was made for a powerful patron, likely as a luxury object, a showpiece gift. A beautiful, horrifying object designed to impress. Think about the layers here. A woman assaulted and punished. Transformed into a monster. Hunted and killed. Her head cut off and used as a weapon by Perseus. And then, centuries later, her head painted again. This time as a masterpiece to be admired. People stand in front of that shield and say, "Look at the realism. Look at the drama. Look at the genius." Because the art is extraordinary. The technique really is brilliant. But behind that admiration, another truth sits quietly. You are looking at a dead woman's head, and culture has decided this is a suitable decoration. It's the same logic as the myth, elevated into aesthetics. Her pain is a spectacle. Her death is an image. Her story is secondary to the artist's skill and the viewer's pleasure. Cellini's Perseus, triumph on a woman's corpse. Now step out of the gallery in your mind and into a civic square in Renaissance Florence. In the open loggia, on a tall pedestal, stands a bronze statue, Benvenuto Cellini's Perseus, with the head of Medusa. Perseus stands nude, muscles taut. Sword in one hand, Medusa's head dangling from the other. Under his feet, her body lies twisted, headless. This statue is meant to be seen as a celebration of victory, the triumph of the hero, the defeat of chaos and horror. For centuries, citizens and tourists have passed it, snapping photos, praising the artistry, maybe shuddering a little at the gore, but ultimately accepting the scene as noble, glorious, heroic. What's actually there? A man, triumphant, physically standing on a woman's body, holding up her severed head as proof of his greatness. The monster under his foot is a victim in hiding. Everything we discussed about Medusa, the assault, the unjust curse, the exile, the murder in sleep, is erased. The only version that remains in the square is, he killed the monster. We honor him for it. When society celebrates a statue like that without context, it's quietly teaching everyone who looks. Killing monsters is glorious. Don't ask too many questions about where monsters come from. Rubens and the aesthetics of a severed head. In another museum somewhere in Europe, you might meet Peter Paul Rubens's head of Medusa. Again, no body, just the head. Snakes undulate, blood glistens, a few small creatures crawl around as if feeding on the scene. It's gruesome, yes, but also exquisitely painted. Viewers stand close, almost nose to glass, studying the brushwork. Look at the irony. In the myth, you must use a mirror and distance to survive looking at Medusa. In the museum, you are invited to come as close as you like. You study the very face that should have killed you on sight, and it's safe because she's dead and trapped in the frame. Her power has been captured, domesticated, turned into an object of study. The curse has been neutralized, not by justice, but by control. The male gaze, petrified and proud. All through art history, it's mostly men who've painted, sculpted, and commissioned Medusa. So we have a long visual record of men looking at the myth of a woman who punishes men for looking. And what is the solution their artworks obsessively present? Don't stop looking. Just kill her first. Their images say over and over, Medusa is fascinating, but she must be decapitated. Her gaze is powerful, but only once it's taken from her and used by others. Her suffering is compelling, as long as it serves our artistic or symbolic purposes. In psychological terms, you could say Medusa's story shows male terror of female anger and sexuality. In artistic terms, you could say they turned that terror into something they could hang on a wall. Instead of asking, "Why are we so afraid of this rage?" they asked, "How can we render this rage beautifully?" Art history is full of Medusa as test of technique, symbol of victory, decorative horror, rarely as person, victim, survivor, whose story should change how we treat the living. But then something shifts. Medusa turns the frame around, jump forward to the 21st century. The same myths still exist, the same artworks still stand, but a different cultural conversation is happening. Movements against sexual violence gain momentum. Victim blaming is being called out more publicly. Survivors are speaking openly, refusing silence, and Medusa begins to look different. She stops being just the monster. She starts to feel familiar. Her story resonates with women who've been assaulted, people whose trauma was used against them, anyone who's been turned into a cautionary tale instead of being offered support. Artists, many of them women, start to reclaim her. They paint her not as a grotesque severed head, but as a living, breathing figure. Still furious, still powerful, but also human. Her snakes become like a crown. Her gaze is fierce, but not deformed. She's no longer a horror. She's a warning, an icon, a guardian. Garbati's reversal, Medusa with the head of Perseus. One sculpture in particular crystallizes this change. In 2008, Italian artist Luciano Garbati created Medusa with the head of Perseus. He flipped Cellini's statue. Now, Medusa stands tall, body intact. Perseus's head hangs from her hand. Her expression is calm, not gloating. She is naked, but not posed as an object for desire. More like someone who refuses to hide for years. It was relatively obscure. Then, in the late 2010s, as high-profile assault cases filled the news, a replica of this Medusa was installed near the Manhattan courthouse, where Harvey Weinstein was tried. Suddenly, the image exploded online. People called her the Feed Me Too Medusa. To some, she was powerful. The victim finally striking back, the hunted woman refusing to be prey, the myth rewritten so that the monster survives. To others, it was uncomfortable, too violent, too literal, too close to celebrating beheading. But that discomfort is part of the point. For centuries, we've been totally comfortable with a man holding her head. We only start arguing about, is this too much? When the roles are reversed. The sculpture doesn't magically fix anything, but it forces the viewer to confront the double standard. Why is her death heroic, and his hypothetical death disturbing? Who taught us that? Re-seeing the old masters. Context as a form of justice. We can't and shouldn't erase Caravaggio, Cellini, Rubens, or all the other artists who turned Medusa into something to look at. Their works are historically important, technically stunning, part of the visual language of the West. But what we can do is change how we talk about them. Imagine museum labels that say something like, "This painting shows the severed head of Medusa, a figure whose story includes sexual assault and victim blaming. For centuries, she was depicted as a monster, while her killer was celebrated as a hero." Suddenly, the viewer isn't just admiring brushwork. They're being invited to think about whose pain is shown, whose perspective is missing, how beauty can be built on injustice. Context doesn't destroy art. It complicates it. It tells the whole truth instead of the flattering version. Looking at Medusa in a museum with that fuller story in mind is like looking into her eyes in the myth, dangerous in the best possible way. It freezes you for a second, stops you from walking past as if nothing is wrong. Tattoos, posters, and the Medusa you choose. Outside museums, Medusa's image has escaped the frames and pedestals. She appears on tattoos across ribs, backs, arms, on protest signs, in survivor circles, on social media as profile pictures and art. Sometimes she's still horrifying. Sometimes she's soft. Sometimes she's sad. Sometimes she's unapologetically vengeful. Each version asks a quiet question. What do you see when you look at me? A monster? A warning? A mirror? Yourself? The old male gaze Medusa was always framed for you in advance. This is a monster. Fear her. Pity her, or admire how realistically her death is painted. The new Medusas being made now leave more space for your own story, your own scars, your own sense of justice. Looking back at the gaze. At the start of her myth, Medusa is defenseless under other people's gaze. Men look at her, want her, take her, punish her. Her beauty draws danger, her body absorbs it, her life is shattered by it. Her curse flips that script. Now the gaze itself becomes dangerous. Whoever tries to look, to possess, to approach with dominance, turns to stone. Art history tried to cancel that reversal by freezing her instead. Into marble, into bronze, into paint. But even in those works, especially when we know her story, something of the original power leaks out. You look at Caravaggio's Medusa, and she looks back. You stand beneath Cellini's bronze, and for a moment you see not a triumph, but a public execution posed as beauty. You walk through galleries and realize how many images take women's suffering and polish it into decor. It's uncomfortable. It should be. That discomfort is a kind of petrification, a forced pause, a moment where the story can't keep moving along the same old tracks. What you do with what you see tonight, you don't have to stop looking at Medusa. You don't have to swear off paintings or statues, but you can change the way you look. When you see her now, in a museum, online, on someone's skin, you can remember. This is a woman whose story was rewritten. This is a head held up as a trophy in other people's narratives. This is an image that has been used to make violence look noble and victimhood look monstrous. You can let that knowledge quietly change how you see. Real news stories about victims and heroes. Real institutions that celebrate themselves while silencing those they've harmed. Real works of beauty built on other people's pain. Medusa's myth says her gaze turns people to stone. But the deeper power of her story is the reverse. If you dare to really look at her, to see the violence, the blame, the erasure, it's your old way of seeing that freezes and cracks. Something rigid in you starts to break. And from that fracture, new sight can grow. For tonight, that's enough. Let the old images float in your mind. The paintings, the statues, the tattoos, the shield, the bronze, the marble. Let them soften and rearrange themselves around a different center. Not the proud hero, not the gleaming sword, but the woman they killed so they could keep looking without consequence. You've seen her now? Really seen her. And once you've done that, you can never go back to just admiring the frame. Let's go back to that first moment. Not in the museum, not on the shield, not in the hero's story, but in the temple, a quiet, sacred place. A girl serving her goddess, a god who decides what he wants and takes it. That is where Medusa's story truly begins. And from that moment onward, the same pattern unfolds, a pattern so old it feels like the bones of the world. Tonight we're going to trace it, slowly, gently, step by step. Because once you see the pattern in Medusa, you start to see it everywhere. And once you see it everywhere, you can't pretend it's just myth anymore. Step 1. The first harm, when power chooses violence, Every story like this starts the same way. Someone with power hurts someone with less. In Medusa's case, it's Poseidon, an immortal god of the sea, lord of storms and earthquakes, walking into Athena's temple and deciding Medusa's body is his to use. She doesn't have real options. How do you say no to a god who can drown islands when he's offended? You can run, but he can follow. You can plead, but his desire outweighs your fear. So violence happens, and the world should stop right there and say, "This is wrong. This is the first and central crime." But it doesn't. Not in the myth, and not often in real life. Instead, the story moves on in a very particular way. Step 2. Shifting the blame. What did she do? After the harm comes the question, but pointed at the wrong person. Not, why did he do this? But, what did she do? With Medusa, this question gets answered by the goddess who should have protected her. Athena doesn't confront Poseidon. She doesn't say, "You defiled my temple and harmed my priestess." Instead, the logic becomes, Medusa's beauty caused this. Medusa's presence in the temple caused this. Medusa is now a problem to be fixed. Her golden hair, the thing men admired, becomes the focus of punishment. Athena takes the part of Medusa that drew attention and twists it into snakes. The message is clear. The crime is not what was done to you. The crime is that you were the kind of person this could happen to. You can hear echoes of that logic today. Why was she out that late? Why was she wearing that? Why did she drink so much? Why did she go there alone? In each question, the spotlight slides away from the one who chose violence and turns back on the one who endured it. The victim becomes a problem to be explained, corrected, judged, just like Medusa. Step 3. Transformation. Trauma becomes identity. Next, something subtle happens. The thing that was done to you starts to define you. It doesn't stay as a terrible thing that happened. It turns into what you are. In the myth, this shift is made literal. Medusa doesn't just carry a wound. She becomes a monster. Her face, once beautiful, is now described as unbearable. Her hair becomes serpents. Her eyes no longer receive violence, they inflict it. Her whole being is rewritten. Not Medusa, a woman who was assaulted, but Medusa, the Gorgon. In the real world, this transformation is quieter, but just as real. A person can go from my friend, my colleague, my classmate, to that girl who was raped, that guy from that case, that person who got abused. Whispers reduce a whole life to a single event. Some survivors start to feel like walking symbols, evidence, drama, warning, instead of full people with dreams, jokes, annoying habits, favorite songs. Medusa loses her humanity under a layer of scales and snakes. Victims today lose theirs under labels and gossip. Step 4. Isolation. Keeping the problem out of sight. Once someone is marked like this, the next step often comes naturally. Keep them away. Away from the temple. Away from polite society. Away from the community that doesn't know what to do with their pain. Medusa is banished to the edge of the world. Not just punished, but removed. Her new body is too dangerous, her presence too unsettling. Anyone who looks at her will be harmed, so the safest thing is to keep her far away, where no one has to deal with her. This is exactly what happens to many survivors. Sometimes it's obvious. The victim is moved to a different school, transferred to another team, told to take a break from work while the accused stays. Sometimes it's subtle. Invitations dry up, friends feel awkward and fade away. Family members change the subject whenever the topic appears. The message becomes, "We're not punishing you. We just think it's better if you're somewhere else." It looks like neutrality, but it feels like exile. Medusa, on her lonely cliff, is every person who learned the hard way that telling the truth means eating alone. Step 5. Fear of the victim. When pain looks dangerous, once someone is transformed and isolated, their pain starts to look threatening. In the myth, Medusa's rage and trauma become a literal curse. Her gaze petrifies. Anyone trying to look at her is frozen forever, locked in a moment of horror. Her very existence becomes frightening. People don't see a woman who survived divine violence. They see the monster that can kill you with a glance. In our world, we don't turn to stone, but many people do freeze up when faced with someone else's trauma. They might think, if I really listen, I'll have to admit what happened was awful. If I believe you, I'll have to rethink what I thought about him, about this place, about the system I work in. If I let your anger exist, I'll have to look at things I don't want to see inside myself. So instead of meeting that pain, they label it too intense, too dramatic, too emotional, unstable, dangerous to the atmosphere. The survivor becomes the one who is making things worse, simply by refusing to hide what was done to them. Medusa, in that sense, is the perfect metaphor for how society sees victim anger. Not as healthy, not as understandable, not as necessary, but as terrifying, disruptive, something we must shield ourselves from. Step 6. Erasure, destroying the victim. Celebrating the hero. And finally, when the world has done all of this, shifted blame, turned trauma into identity, pushed the victim out, grown afraid of their pain, it often chooses one last act of violence. In the myth, this is where Perseus arrives. Armed with gifts from the gods, blessed by Athena, praised for his courage, he enters Medusa's exile not to understand, not to listen, but to kill. He waits until she is sleeping. He uses a polished shield so he never has to look her in the eye, and he cuts off her head. This is called heroism. Medusa's death becomes his glory, his ticket out of poverty, his proof of worth. No one in the story asks what killing her actually solves. She wasn't attacking cities, burning ships, hunting innocents. She was surviving in the only way she knew how, after everything that had been done to her. But it is tidier for the world of the myth if she is gone. In real life, this final step doesn't always look like murder. More often it looks like character assassination, reputation destruction, lawsuits that scare others into silence, online mobs. She's crazy. Don't listen to her. He's just doing it for attention. They're trying to ruin a good man's career. The aim is the same. Remove the uncomfortable truth-teller. Make them unbelievable. Make them disappear. And then, in a cruel twist, the one who caused harm or helped cover it up is honored, promoted, re-elected, given awards, praised as resilient for moving on from the controversy. Perseus gets a constellation. Medusa gets a warning label. The pattern all together. If we put it all in a row, Medusa's story looks like this. 1. Violence. Poseidon assaults her. 2. Blame. Athena punishes Medusa, not him. 3. Transformation. She is turned from woman into monster. 4. Isolation. She is banished to the edge of the world. 5. Fear. Her pain and rage become a deadly gaze. 6. Erasure. Perseus kills her and becomes a hero. Now gently replace the names. Poseidon with an abuser. Athena with an institution. Medusa with a survivor. Perseus with a man who profits from silencing the story. You'll recognize this pattern in news headlines, whispered rumors, old scandals, and stories your friends told you once and then never brought up again. The details change. The structure doesn't. Why this pattern is so stubborn? This way of telling the story does something very convenient for people with power. If the problem is the victim, too pretty, too naive, too drunk, too angry, too loud, then nothing fundamental has to change. No God has to answer for what he did. No institution has to admit failure. No hero has to give back his medals and say, "I built my fame on someone else's suffering." The system keeps turning. Medusa dies. The gods stay gods. Perseus gets to fly home. And if anyone feels uneasy, they can tell themselves the easy version. She was a monster. Killing her saved people. It's such a seductive story that we sometimes repeat it without realizing we're doing the gods' work for them. How the pattern shows up in everyday talk. You can hear the pattern in the smallest comments. It sounds like, "Why did she go back to his place then?" Well, if it was really that bad, why didn't he report sooner? They're probably exaggerating. They seemed fine the next day. I don't want to take sides. It's not my business. Each sentence seems harmless, almost reasonable, but together they build a wall between us and the uncomfortable truth. They help us avoid looking into Medusa's eyes, because looking means admitting the world is unfair, that systems we trust hide ugliness, that people we like do terrible things. Turning away is easier, so we participate, softly, politely, in her exile. Where the pattern can break. The myth of Medusa doesn't give us a different ending. She dies. That part won't change. But the pattern is not a law. It's a habit. And habits can be broken. Whenever someone today says, "This happened to me," we face a tiny version of Athena's choice. Do we look away to protect our comfort? Or do we stay and listen, even if it complicates our picture of the world? We also face a tiny version of Perseus's choice. Do we use someone's story for our own benefit? For gossip? For content? For moral superiority? Or do we treat that story as something fragile, private, given in trust? Here are small ways the pattern can fracture. Instead of, "What did you do?" we ask, "What was done to you?" Instead of, "Why didn't you?" we say, "You did the best you could in an impossible situation." Instead of changing the subject, we offer, "I'm here. You can share as much or as little as you want." Instead of fearing someone's anger, we recognize, "Of course you're angry. That makes sense." Instead of isolating them, we keep inviting, keep including, without forcing them to act fine. Instead of erasing them, we remember their story even when it's inconvenient. These acts are small, but they are the exact opposite of what happened to Medusa. They are little spells against victim blaming. Seeing Medusa when you meet real people, you might never stand face to face with a marble Gorgon in a Renaissance square, but you will absolutely meet people whose stories rhyme with hers. They won't have snakes in their hair. They won't turn anyone to stone. But you'll see. A colleague who suddenly left a job after some drama. A friend whose ex is still beloved by everyone else. A family member whose side of the story no one really wants to hear. And in those moments, you can quietly remember Medusa. Not to romanticize their pain, not to make them mythic, but to remind yourself there's always another version. The monster in one story is often the victim in another. Just holding that thought keeps you from becoming another Perseus, swinging his sword without asking questions. The hardest part, looking and staying soft. It's tempting to react to all this by hardening, to think, the world is terrible, people are cruel, I can't trust anyone. But that, too, is a kind of petrification. Your heart turns to stone to protect itself. Medusa's gaze wins in the bleakest sense. The challenge is to see the pattern, feel the anger and the sadness, and still stay human. To let your empathy grow fangs, but not become nothing but fangs. To allow your gaze to be clear without becoming a weapon. To say, I know what the world can do. I believe people who tell me something terrible happened, and I'm still choosing not to turn away. That is a different kind of power than the power of turning men to stone. It's quieter, less cinematic, but it's the kind of power that changes outcomes, one conversation at a time. Medusa's warning retold. When people used to tell Medusa's story, they meant her as a warning against women. Don't be too beautiful. Don't provoke gods or men. Don't break rules of purity. Tonight, after walking through the pattern, her warning sounds different. Now it whispers, be careful whenever you see a story where the monster dies and the hero looks spotless. Ask who is telling it. Ask whose voice is missing. Ask who benefits from this version. Medusa's life can't be saved, but the next person caught in her pattern might be believed sooner, isolated less, destroyed less completely, because you recognized how the story usually goes and chose to hear it differently. For now, you don't need to fix the world. Just rest with the knowledge that you've seen the bones of a very old pattern, laid bare in the life of a woman who was never given a chance to tell the story herself. In the next chapter, we'll listen to how feminists picked up her silence and began, slowly, to give the Gorgon back her voice. Imagine Medusa not on a shield, not under Perseus's boot, but standing up, not apologizing, not hiding, not begging to be seen as nice again. Just standing there, serpents alive, eyes clear, finally allowed to be herself. That's what the last 50 years of feminist thought and art have tried to do, to take Medusa off the hero's trophy wall and put her back in her own body. T1. A sentence that changed everything. In 1975, French feminist writer Hélène Cixous wrote a famous line. You only have to look at the Medusa straight on to see her, and she's not deadly. She's beautiful, and she's laughing. For centuries, men had written about Medusa as terrifying, castrating, the nightmare of female sexuality. Cixous does something radically simple. She says, what if that's just what men see when they're afraid? What if Medusa's horror is really just the projection of male anxiety onto female power? Turn the lens, adjust the focus, and suddenly, the monster is a woman. The scream is laughter. The curse is strength. Same face. Different story. 2. Why Medusa became a feminist icon. Feminists looked at Medusa's life and recognized the pattern. Woman is desired. Woman is violated. Woman is blamed. Woman is punished. Woman is turned into a warning. That's not just myth. That's history. So Medusa became a symbol for women and survivors who were tired of being told, "You provoked it. You ruined your own life. Your anger is the problem." Her snake hair turned into rage that refuses to be hidden, difference that refuses to be fixed, power that refuses to shrink. Her gaze turned into the look that says, "I see what you did," the look that refuses to flatter, appease, or make it easier for you. For many survivors, Medusa became not the creature who kills, but the one who finally can't be hurt in the same way again. For 3. From Freud's nightmare to women's emblem in the early 20th century, Sigmund Freud wrote about Medusa as if she lived entirely inside a man's nervous system. To him, her snake hair and terrible face symbolized male fear of female sexuality. Castration anxiety, the old psychoanalytic phrase. In that story, Medusa isn't a person. She is male fear wearing a female mask. Feminists took that same material and flipped it. If Freud sees horror, maybe that says more about Freud than about Medusa. Maybe the castration terror is just patriarchal panic at the idea that women might have power that doesn't center male comfort. Instead of, Medusa is proof that female sexuality is terrifying. They suggested, Medusa is proof that men are terrified when women stop being safe, small, and silent. Same myth, different reader. 4. Retelling the story from her side, then came the novels, poems, and plays. Writers, many of them women, started asking, what if Medusa told this herself? So they gave her a childhood, friendships, fears and hopes, complicated feelings about her body, a voice that trembles, then sharpens. In these retellings, Medusa is not just the Gorgon. She is a priestess who trusted her goddess, a girl who loved the sea before it turned on her, a sister to Steino and Euryale, with shared jokes and shared grief, a woman trying to live with a body that has been turned into a weapon she never asked for. Perseus shrinks in these versions. He's not the center. He's a late arrival, a boy with a magic sword who walks into a story already full of pain and history he doesn't understand. Athena stops being the flawless mentor and becomes a complicated, flawed woman in power, a goddess who chooses the system over her own priestess. The whole moral geometry of the myth tilts and rearranges itself. Medusa isn't a boss fight. She's the main character. 5. The art that flips the sculpture. For centuries, the most famous Medusa sculpture was Cellini's Perseus with the head of Medusa. Perseus standing tall, Medusa's body under his foot, her head dangling from his hand like a bloody trophy. In 2008, sculptor Luciano Garbati created an answer. Medusa with the head of Perseus. Same pose, but reversed. Now Medusa stands. Now Perseus's head hangs. Her body is naked, but not in submission. She's not cowering or ashamed. She's upright, firm, self-possessed. The sculpture went viral years later when it was placed near a New York courthouse where high-profile assault trials were unfolding. Some people saw it and felt vindication, catharsis, finally, a picture where the victim isn't the one dead on the ground. Others said, but isn't this just reversing the violence? Do we really want beheading as justice? And both responses are part of the point. The statue doesn't give us a neat moral lesson. It throws the old sculpture back at us and asks, why were you comfortable for centuries with her head hanging, but uneasy now that the roles are reversed? It exposes how normalized her death has been. 6. Medusa as tattoo, protest sign, quiet promise. Walk through any big city today, and you'll probably pass someone with Medusa inked on their skin. Sometimes she's crying, roaring, calm and regal, laughing like Sixus described. Sometimes the snakes are soft, twining like vines. Sometimes they're all fangs and motion. For many people, especially survivors, that tattoo isn't just cool mythology. It's a private banner. I will never again be as powerless as I once was. My story won't be erased. You can be afraid of my anger if you need to be. I'm done shrinking it for you. On protest posters, Medusa's face appears beside slogans like, "Believe survivors. I will not be your monster. Your fear of my rage is not my problem." The myth is no longer just Greek. It's global. Women and marginalized people from many cultures see themselves in the pattern of being harmed, blamed, turned into warning stories. So they borrow Medusa as a shorthand, a shared language. If you know her story, you know something about mine. 7. Who gets to claim Medusa? Reclaiming a figure this powerful brings its own questions. Is Medusa only a symbol for sexual assault survivors? Or can she stand for all women under patriarchy? Queer people demonized as deviant? Trans and non-binary folks called unnatural or monstrous? People of color turned into threats in the public imagination? Some say her story is specifically about sexual violence and victim blaming. Don't water that down. Others say the pattern of being turned into a monster by systems of power is wider than one kind of harm. Medusa belongs to everyone who's been demonized for existing. There's no single right answer, but the very fact that this debate exists shows how alive she is now. A dead myth doesn't provoke arguments about representation. A living symbol does. 8. From cautionary tale to call to action. In the old moral, Medusa existed to warn women. Be pure. Be careful. Don't get noticed. Or look what you become. In the new moral, she warns all of us about something else. What happens when we believe only the hero's version? What happens when we accept institutional silence? What happens when we confuse a victim's anger with a threat to safety? Reclaimed Medusa doesn't say, "Be afraid of female rage." She says, "Be afraid of a world where rage like this keeps having reasons to exist." She doesn't say, "Turn men to stone." She says, "Turn systems to stone. Stop them long enough to really see what they're doing." 9. What reclaiming her changes in us. Rewriting Medusa's story doesn't resurrect her. The temple still happened, the curse still changed her, the exile still lasted, the sword still fell. What changes is us. When you look at her now and see a survivor instead of a monster, you train your mind to ask better questions in real life. Instead of, "What did she do to deserve it?" you start with, "What was done to her?" Who benefits from calling her crazy or dangerous? Whose version of the story is missing? You become less impressed by shiny Perseus narratives where the hero never doubts himself. You become more interested in the quiet people whose pain never made it to the official version. That's the real reclamation. Not just a new poster or statue, but a new reflex in the mind. A habit of looking twice before you accept who the monster is supposed to be. Chapter 10. Medusa. Standing beside you. So tonight, if you picture Medusa, try this. Don't see her head on a shield. See her whole. Feet on the ground. Body scarred but solid. Snakes alive but not frantic. Alert, watchful, protective. See a woman who had violence done to her, was punished for it, was turned into a nightmare story, and is, piece by piece, being taken back by those who recognize themselves in her. Reclaiming Medusa doesn't mean glorifying violence or worshipping rage. It means telling the truth about how a victim became a monster and then refusing to let that happen so easily again. It means saying, "You tried to make her a warning against us. We'll make her a warning against you, against every system that chooses power over justice and then calls its victims monsters." In the next chapter, we'll return to a quiet detail that most versions of the myth barely touch: Medusa's children, born at the moment she dies, and what it means to have life and violence bound together that tightly. For a long time, everyone thought the story ended with a blade. Perseus raises his sword. The mirror flashes. Medusa's eyes close. Silence. But that's not where the story stops, because the moment her head falls, something impossible happens, something the myth itself seems startled to admit. From the blood spilling onto the ground, two forms rise: a winged horse, white as foam, and a golden warrior, radiant as dawn, Pegasus and Chrysaor, children of the sea, god Poseidon, born not in love, but in violence, born at the edge of the world, from the wound of their mother's death. 1. Blood that gives birth. Greek myth is full of paradoxes, but none stranger than this. Out of death comes life. Out of a curse comes beauty. Out of punishment comes flight. Even the storytellers seemed unsure what to do with it. They never explain exactly how these children emerge. One line, one image, and then we're on to Perseus again. But if we slow the story down, if we give that moment back its silence, it becomes something holy. The blood on the stones of that lonely island wasn't just a mark of violence, it was a seed. Something inside Medusa refused to die with her. 2. Pegasus. The child of air Pegasus bursts upward first, a surge of white wings, a flash of motion too bright to look at. His name comes from the Greek pigi, meaning spring or water source. So even in language, he's tied to the sea, to Poseidon, to fluidity, to the power of what can't be contained. But Pegasus isn't the sea. He's what escapes it. He rises. He trades waves for clouds, depth for height, weight for flight. He is, quite literally, freedom born of suffering. Every flap of his wings is a refusal to stay earthbound by what happened before. That's why, for thousands of years, Pegasus became a symbol of poets, dreamers, and creators. He's not just a pretty horse with wings. He's the child of trauma who learned how to turn pain into movement. If Medusa's curse was to freeze everything she looked at, Pegasus's gift is to keep everything moving. He's the answer to the paralysis. He's what happens when the story finds a way forward despite the wound. 3. Chrysaor, the Golden One. The other child is quieter in myth. Chrysaor, whose name means he of the golden sword. Sometimes he's described as a man, sometimes a giant, sometimes simply radiant. Where Pegasus embodies transcendence, Chrysaor stands for strength, groundedness, the will to fight. If Pegasus is motion, Chrysaor is purpose. Together they make a strange pair, the sky and the earth, the dreamer and the doer, the artist and the avenger. Both of them carry their mother's story inside them, but they express it differently. Pegasus flees the violence by flying beyond it. Chrysaor faces it head-on, his golden sword gleaming like an unspoken promise. We remember her. We do not forgive. 4. the mother they never knew. The most haunting thing about Pegasus and Chrysaor is that they never meet Medusa. They're born at the instant she dies. Her blood is their cradle. Her final breath is their first wind. They will never hear her voice, never see her smile, never know what she prayed for before everything went wrong. And yet, everything they are is shaped by her. The world calls Medusa a monster, but her children, pure, luminous, godlike, carry her legacy in every feather, every golden spark. It's as if the universe itself refused to let the story end in horror. You will not reduce her to a corpse, it seems to whisper. From her will come beauty and motion and light. You can kill her body, but not what she became. Pointer 5. Meaning through myth. What survives a wound. Every culture has stories where something terrible creates something sacred. Lotus flowers blooming from mud. Phoenixes rising from ash. New worlds forming from chaos. Pegasus and Chrysaor are Greece's version of that truth. They remind us, the end of something can also be the beginning of something unimagined. When Medusa's blood touched the earth, it didn't say, "This is over." It said, "This continues, but differently." That's what trauma often does in the real world too. The event is unbearable, the loss is permanent, but somewhere inside the wreckage, something begins to grow. A new art, a new boundary, a new strength, a new voice. Not because suffering is good, but because the human spirit is stubborn about finding a way to keep existing. Medusa's children are that instinct, made myth. 6. The cost of transformation. But it's important to remember, life born of death is not a happy ending. Pegasus's wings are dazzling, but they come at the cost of his mother's body. Chrysaor's sword gleams, but it was forged in blood. This kind of beauty doesn't cancel the horror. It sits beside it. It says, "This happened. And still, something else is happening too." It's not redemption. It's continuation. And sometimes, that's the only kind of grace available. Chapter 7. What Pegasus and Chrysaor mean for us. If Medusa's story is the anatomy of victim-blaming and exile, then her children's birth is the anatomy of survival. They don't erase her suffering. They extend her existence. Pegasus is what we make when we create out of pain. Art, poetry, movement, music. Chrysaor is what we become when we decide that anger and love can coexist in one heart. Both are ways of saying, "You didn't end me. You just changed my form." Key D8. The flight that never stops. In later myths, Pegasus becomes the companion of another hero, Bellerophon, and together they slay monsters. Eventually, Pegasus is immortalized among the stars, constellations, brightness, light that crosses centuries. And if you look up at him tonight, it's hard not to think that maybe part of Medusa's spirit escaped through those wings, that she got to fly after all, not as a head on a shield, but as a shimmer in the sky. Every star in that pattern is a tiny act of rebellion against the story that tried to end her. Chapter 9. The real inheritance Medusa didn't get justice from the gods. She didn't get understanding from her goddess. She didn't get mercy from her killer. But she got something rarer. She got legacy. Everywhere Pegasus flies, every time a poet calls his name, every time someone uses him as a symbol of freedom and inspiration, they are, knowingly or not, celebrating the child of a woman the world tried to erase. And that's how myths heal themselves over time, by letting the truth slip back in through the cracks. As you breathe out now, Imagine that flight. White wings against endless blue, golden light on the horizon, and somewhere far below, the waves still murmuring her name. Medusa did not vanish. She changed form. The curse became movement. The pain became possibility. And even from death, she gave birth to things that could never be chained again. For most of history, this is where people stopped thinking. Perseus lifts the bag, holds up the head, saves his mother, marries the princess, becomes a king, hero. End of story. But tonight, we're not going to let him walk off the stage that easily. Because Perseus's story, when you hold it up to the light, starts to look less like pure heroism and more like something else. Something messier, more human, more uncomfortable. 1. The boy raised on fear, Perseus never asked to be born into prophecy. His grandfather, King Acrisius, was told that his daughter's son would kill him one day. So Acrisius did what frightened men with power often do. He tried to control the future by hurting people in the present. He locked his daughter Danae in a bronze chamber, sealed away from the world. But gods ignore walls. Zeus came to her as a shower of gold, and Perseus was conceived in a room built out of fear. From his very first breath, Perseus was proof that power goes where it wants, and that women pay the price for men's attempts to control what they fear. His grandfather tried to erase him by sealing mother and child in a chest and throwing them into the sea. A baby in a coffin of wood, cradled by waves. He survived. Of course he did. But his entire life began because someone tried to stop a prophecy. The story was already soaked in fear long before he ever heard the name Medusa. 2-2. A quest he didn't choose. On the island where he grows up, Perseus is just a poor boy with a divine father, a protective mother, and no real power. Then King Polydectes decides he wants Danae for himself. Perseus stands in the way, not with armies, not with status, just with the stubbornness of a son who refuses to let his mother be used again. Polydectes can't simply kill him. That would look bad. So he does something crueler and more respectable. He turns Perseus's pride into a weapon. He mocks him at a banquet, pushes and prods until the boy blurts out a boast he can't take back. "I could bring you anything, even the head of Medusa." There it is, the sentence that will kill Medusa. Not because Perseus is evil, because he's young, poor, cornered, and desperate to prove himself in a world that only respects grand gestures and impossible quests. The trap closes. Polydectes smiles. And a woman on the other side of the world has no idea death has just been promised in her name. 3. The hero who never looks directly. When Athena and Hermes appear, the storybooks make it sound noble. Divine favor. Chosen one. Blessed quest. But look at what they actually give him. A mirror shield so he doesn't have to look Medusa in the eyes. A cap of invisibility so she can't see him coming. Winged sandals to strike fast, and a sword sharp enough to end a life in one clean arc. Perseus is armed not for a duel, but for an execution. The mirror shield is the most haunting. It keeps him safe, yes, but it also keeps him from seeing. He never has to face Medusa as a person, never has to meet her gaze and recognize what's in it. Rage, terror, loneliness, the knowledge of what was done to her. He sees only her reflection, flattened in bronze, already turned into an image, a thing. He kills her without ever truly looking at her. That's the pattern, isn't it? People do the most damage to those they refuse to look at directly. Corporations exploit workers they never meet. Systems erase people they only see as statistics. Politicians write laws about bodies they never sit with, never hold space for, never listen to. Perseus is the ancient version of that. A man doing terrible harm, escorted and equipped by power, kept morally comfortable by never having to look his victim fully in the eye. 4. The useful head. Once Medusa is dead, her head becomes resource. Perseus uses it on the Titan Atlas, on sea monsters, on hostile courts. Each time, he pulls her out like a tool. A woman he never knew, never understood, strapped to his belt as a permanent solution to other people's violence. Even when he saves Andromeda, the princess chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea beast, he does it with Medusa's head. One woman's suffering used to save another woman's life. The gesture is heroic on the surface, but underneath, it's built on a previous crime he's never fully examined. He saves his mother from Polydectes the abuser by turning the king to stone. With Medusa's face. Justice, yes, but justice built on an earlier injustice. This is how hero narratives often work. One good act is used to wash away unquestioned harm. We remember the saved princess, the freed mother, and forget the sleeping woman whose body became a weapon to make all that possible. 5. The prophecy comes due. Eventually, Perseus returns home. His grandfather Acrisius, still terrified of the prophecy, stays far away. But fate, or chance, or narrative symmetry brings them to the same athletic games. Perseus throws a discus. The wind catches it. It veers. It kills an old man in the crowd. He rushes over, horrified, and realizes it's Acrisius. The prophecy, desperately fought with prisons and infanticide and exile, comes true anyway. Perseus never intended it. He didn't throw the discus as a weapon. But intention doesn't erase impact. His story ends, like Medusa's, with a death caused by a man who never meant to. The difference? Perseus gets statues and stars. Medusa gets blame. 6. The story he told himself. We don't know if Perseus ever felt guilty. Myths aren't interested in his inner life that way. But human beings tend to build narratives we can live with. It's possible Perseus looked back on his life and told himself a version like this. I defended my mother. I saved a princess. I rid the world of a monster. Any harm along the way was unfortunate, but necessary. That sentence, unfortunate but necessary, has excused more violence than any blade ever forged. He might have remembered Medusa, as everyone told him she was. A threat, a danger, a test he passed. Not as she truly was. A woman he never met, whose head bought him a future. Perseus, like many people in power, could only remain a hero by never asking certain questions. Who was she before I reached her? What was done to her before I arrived? Whose version of this story have I accepted as truth? Because it benefited me to believe it. 7. Our modern Perseus moments. Most of us will never decapitate a Gorgon, but we might work for companies that profit from others' suffering. We might live in systems that advantage us because they disadvantage someone else. We might inherit wealth, comfort, stability, built on histories we never had to look at directly. It's easy to be Perseus then, to say, I worked hard, without acknowledging the unseen heads in the bag, the labor, the land, the bodies, the stories that made our heroic lives possible. Perseus is not just a boy with a sword. He's a template for how a culture can frame someone as heroic while keeping inconvenient victims out of the frame. 8. The mirror turned around. The real magic object in Perseus's story isn't the sword, or the sandals, or the cap. It's the mirror. He uses it to avoid seeing the person he kills. But what if we turned it around? What if we held that mirror up to Perseus himself? To heroes who never ask who paid the price for their greatness. To institutions that stand tall on foundations of unexamined harm. To ourselves, when we benefit from systems we'd rather not think about. The mirror doesn't kill. It reveals. It shows us that sometimes the line between hero and perpetrator is not a line at all, but a circle. A loop of cause and effect, where one person's triumph is built on another's suffering. Perseus never looks, but we can. We can ask the questions he didn't. We can widen the frame, pull Medusa back into the story, and admit that heroism built on erased victims is not the kind of heroism we want to celebrate anymore. As you let your eyes grow heavy, imagine that mirror shield lying quietly on the ground now, no longer reflecting a monster, but reflecting you. Not to condemn, to invite you to be the kind of hero who looks directly, who asks, who listens, who refuses to accept any victory that requires someone else to be turned into a monster. In the next and final chapter, we'll step back from all of this, Medusa, Perseus, Athena, Pegasus, and ask one last question. Now that we've seen the whole pattern, what do we do with it when we wake up tomorrow? When this story ends, your life keeps going. You close the book, turn off the screen, switch off the light. Morning will still come. There will still be emails, deadlines, traffic, messages, small frictions, ordinary joys. No gods, no Gorgons, no heroes with mirror shields. And yet, the pattern we've traced doesn't stay in the past. It walks beside you into tomorrow. The question now isn't, what happened to Medusa? It's, what will you do in a world that used to call her a monster? 1. 3 roles we play over and over. In Medusa's story, you've met 3 kinds of characters. The Medusas, those who are hurt, blamed, reshaped by trauma. The Perseuses, those who gain something from harm they didn't look too closely at. The Athenas, those who have some power, and must choose whether to protect themselves or protect the vulnerable. Most of us will be each of these at different moments in our lives. Sometimes you'll be Medusa, carrying wounds you didn't choose. Sometimes you'll be Perseus, benefiting from systems or decisions that hurt someone else out of your line of sight. Sometimes you'll be Athena, standing at a crossroads where protecting your comfort requires turning away from someone who needs you. The point of this whole journey was never to convince you that you're one character forever. It was to help you recognize when you're stepping into each role, and to give you enough clarity to choose differently than the myth did. Chapter 2. When you are Medusa, you may not have snakes for hair, but you know what it feels like to be changed by something you didn't consent to. A betrayal that made you suspicious of kindness. A humiliation that made you fear being seen. An assault. A loss. A cruelty that wrapped itself around your nervous system and taught your body new ways to brace, flinch, shut down. Maybe you've felt that. You're too much now, too angry, too guarded, too broken. Your story makes other people uncomfortable. Parts of you feel dangerous to those around you, even when you don't want them to. The world will sometimes respond like ancient Greece did, by trying to push you to the edges. Tone it down. Stop bringing it up. Why can't you just move on? When you are Medusa, Remember this: you are not the monster. You are the evidence. Evidence that something was wrong. Evidence that someone crossed a boundary. Evidence that this world is not as gentle as it pretends to be. Your anger is a healthy part of you that refused to accept what happened as normal. Your defenses are functions, not flaws. They kept you alive in a place that did not keep you safe. The work ahead of you is not be less, it's be met. Met by people who can hear your story without turning away. Spaces that don't punish your honesty. Relationships where your too much finally fits just right. You don't owe anyone a softer version of your pain, so they'll find you easier to look at. If they can't bear your gaze, that's not because you're cursed. It's because the truth in your eyes asks more of them than they are ready to give. That's about them, not you. 3. When you are Perseus. Sometimes you'll get what you want because someone else lost something they never chose to give. You get hired because someone else was quietly pushed out. You pay a low price because the real cost was hidden in someone else's labor. You enjoy safety created by systems that treated other people as acceptable casualties. You don't have to be cruel to fill this role. You just have to be willing not to ask too many questions. That's the Perseus temptation. To let your success rest on the sentence, unfortunate, but necessary. When you notice you're holding a head in the bag, a benefit you carry because someone else was cut off, you have choices Perseus never took. You can look directly at the cost. Ask, whose story is missing from the version that flatters me? Name what you see instead of pretending that harm never happened. Share what you gained, materially or symbolically, with those who paid the invisible price. Refuse quests that require you to hurt someone else to prove your worth. You won't do this perfectly. No one does. But every time you choose to see more instead of less, to listen instead of defend, you step out of Perseus's shadow and into something more honest, more human, more worth calling heroic. 4. When you are Athena. One day, if it hasn't happened already, someone will tell you what was done to them. They will put in your hands a story that could cost you something if you truly honor it. Maybe they'll name a person you admire, a boss you need, a family member you love, a system that pays your salary. You will feel the pull of two different loyalties. Loyalty to the person trusting you with their pain. Loyalty to the structures and relationships that make your life feel stable. This is Athena's moment. The moment when you could say, "Are you sure? Maybe you misunderstood. Do you have proof? I don't want to get involved. Turn your eyes away, preserve your place." Or you could say, instead, "I believe you. Thank you for trusting me with this. How can I support you? What do you need from me?" And yes, that might cost you. Comfort, reputation, access, opportunities. That's why so many Athenas in real life make the same choice the goddess did. But every time one person chooses solidarity over safety, the pattern cracks a little more. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be a tiny bit more loyal to the hurt person in front of you than to the comfort of pretending nothing happened. That's all it takes to start writing a different myth. 5. Changing the stories we pass on. Someday, a child will ask you about heroes and monsters. They might not use those words. They might say, "Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Why didn't anyone help her? How could they do that?" You'll have a choice then about what kind of story you hand them. You can give them the old version. Some people are just monsters. The hero kills them. The end. Or you can give them something truer. Some people do terrible things because they were never taught how to do better, or because power told them they'd never have to answer for what they did. Some people survive terrible things and become hard in places they were meant to be soft. And some people see all that and decide to be the kind of human who doesn't look away. You can tell them that every monster has a story, that every hero should be questioned, that the bravest people are often those who tell the truth when everyone else prefers the easier lie. You don't need to say Medusa for the lesson to pass through, but you'll know where you learned it. 6. Tiny rebellions against an ancient pattern. You don't have to dismantle all of patriarchy before breakfast. You don't have to rewrite the entire world. Just try this. When someone tells you they've been hurt, let "I believe you" be the first stone you throw into the old story. When you catch yourself asking, "What did they do to cause this?" gently add, "What was done to them?" When you benefit from something, ask, "Who isn't in this room who should be?" When you feel your own anger rising, ask not, "How do I get rid of this?" but, "What is this anger trying to protect?" Those are tiny acts, but myths are built one sentence at a time. So are new worlds. 17 Thieves. 7. Laying down the shield. We've spent hours with Medusa now. You've seen her as priestess, victim, monster, weapon, symbol, mirror. You've watched her story used to entertain, to warn, to justify, to control, to awaken. Tonight, as you prepare to sleep, you get to choose how you'll carry her tomorrow. Not as a severed head on a shield, but as a quiet question in your pocket. In this moment, am I treating someone as a monster when they are really a Medusa? That's enough. That's everything. 8. The arena is closed. The temple is quiet. Picture this, one last time. A temple floor swept clean. No gods today, no thunder, no crashing waves, just the echo of footsteps long gone. At the edge of the world, a rocky shore where a woman once lived alone with her curse. The wind moves through empty caves. The snakes are quiet. The stone figures have crumbled back into dust. In the night sky above, a horse of stars flies on, never having met the mother who bled him into being. And somewhere between them, between temple and shore, between myth and morning, you lie in your bed, eyes drifting closed, holding a story you will never again be able to tell the old way. Medusa is with you now, not as a threat, but as a promise, that you will try, imperfectly but sincerely, to live in a way that makes fewer monsters out of wounded people, that you will look where Perseus looked away, that you will stand when you can, where Athena did not, that you will believe, support, and protect the Medusas you meet, including the one you might sometimes find in the mirror. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let the old stories turn to stone and crumble. Let new ones root quietly in the soft ground of your sleeping mind. The gods are silent. The monsters are resting. The arena is empty. All that's left now is you, and the future you will help write when you wake. You've just spent an hour and a half walking beside a woman the world called a monster. Maybe the most uncomfortable part of Medusa's story is this: nothing truly supernatural is required for it to happen again. You don't need gods, or gorgons, or magic. You just need power, silence, and people who find it easier to blame the wounded than confront the ones who did the wounding. In Medusa's world, a god assaults her and walks away untouched. A goddess protects her own status instead of her own priestess. A hero builds his name on the body of a sleeping exile. Artists turn her severed head into decoration. For centuries, people repeated the story and called it justice. In our world, the costumes change, but the script feels familiar. Someone is hurt, and before we ask, "What happened to you?" we ask, "What were you doing there? What did you wear? Why didn't you leave sooner?" We turn trauma into identity. The girl that happened to, the guy who couldn't handle it, the person everyone lowers their voice to talk about. Medusa's myth is not here to make us hate Perseus or Athena or even the gods. It's here to make us suspicious of every story that names a monster but never asks who benefits from calling them that. It's here to warn us how easily we can become part of the crowd nodding along while someone else is turned into a cautionary tale. If there's one lesson to carry away, it's this. Whenever you hear about a monster, pause and look closer. Ask whose voice is missing. Ask who's telling the story and what they gain from the telling. You may find another Medusa there, someone who deserved protection, not a curse. If you're still here, it probably means Medusa's story hit something in you. Don't just let that feeling fade into the autoplay queue. Tell me in the comments, who do you think was the real monster in this story? And which part of Medusa's journey stayed with you the most? If you know someone who's ever been blamed for something done to them, share this video with them. Not as proof, but as a reminder. They're not crazy, they're not alone, and their story deserves to be told from their side. And if you want more long-form deep dives into hidden histories and untold perspectives from myth and legend, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're just getting started.